Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Before we begin this long journey together, allow me to step out of the pages of history and speak to you in my own voice. My name is Grover Cleveland, and today, I invite you to walk beside me through the story of my life. Its struggles, its quiet moments, its unexpected turns, and the responsibilities that shaped not only my future, but the future of the nation I served. You may know me as the only president of the United States to serve 2 non-consecutive terms, a distinction that has followed my name for more than a century. But long before that unique chapter was written, I was simply a boy from a large, hard-working family, raised on modest means and taught to value honesty, discipline, and duty above all. My life was never marked by early privilege, nor guided by grand ambition. Instead, every step I took was shaped by necessity, by principle, and by a belief that public trust is sacred. In the world I grew up in, nothing came easily. Every opportunity had to be earned. Every responsibility had to be carried with care. I never imagined that these simple lessons, learned through long hours of work, quiet sacrifice, and moments of unexpected clarity, would one day lead me to the mayor's office, the governor's mansion, and ultimately, the presidency of a nation undergoing profound change. In the chapters ahead, I will share with you the journey as I lived it, how I struggled to find my path, how I learned to serve with integrity, how I confronted challenges both personal and political, and how I wrestled with decisions that shaped the course of American history. You will hear not only the facts of my life, but the thoughts and feelings that accompanied them, the doubts I carried, the burdens I accepted, and the convictions that sustained me. This is not simply a historical recounting. It is a personal reflection, a look back at a life that unfolded unexpectedly, shaped by duty more than desire, responsibility more than ambition. So, settle in. Our journey will be a long one, spanning 4 hours of stories, memories, and reflections. I will guide you from my earliest days, through the rise of my public career, into the presidency, and finally toward the quiet years of my retirement. Through it all, I hope you will come to understand not just what I did, but why I did it. Let us begin my story, a story of an ordinary man asked to shoulder extraordinary responsibilities, a story of perseverance, of reform, and of the enduring belief that honesty in public life matters. Welcome to my life. Welcome to the journey of Grover Cleveland. I was born on March 18, 1837, in Caldwell, New Jersey, a place so small and quiet that, even as I look back across the decades, the earliest memories feel less like scenes from a town and more like fragments of a single household, a single family rhythm, a single continuous lesson in the meaning of simplicity. My parents never set out to raise a son who would one day lead a nation. They only hoped to raise children who were honest, disciplined, and faithful. In those days, I could not have imagined the future. I was simply the 5th of 9 children, living in a world where each day felt more like a task than a step toward destiny. My father, a Presbyterian minister, shaped the atmosphere of our home in ways that are difficult to describe. His voice had a certain weight, not because it was loud, but because it carried conviction. When he spoke of moral duty, he did so with a seriousness that left no room for argument and no need for it. We understood that the integrity of a person was measured not by their ambitions, but by their behavior when no one was watching. Many people later called me stern or stubborn, but I know now that much of that perception began with the quiet discipline of my upbringing. A minister's household knows little indulgence. Even as children, we were expected to behave with restraint, to speak thoughtfully, and to live honestly. These expectations were not burdens. They were the foundation of my character. My mother was the gentler force in our home, though no less firm in her convictions. She managed a large household with modest means, and she did so with a patience and steadiness that I would only come to appreciate fully in adulthood. She had a way of introducing warmth into even the most difficult circumstances, reminding us, often without words, that hardship was temporary, but character was permanent. When we lacked food, she portioned it fairly. When we lacked money, she taught us contentment. When we lacked certainty, she offered calm. There was something unshakable in her presence, something that taught us that the measure of a family's strength lies not in what it possesses, but in what it endures together. Growing up among 8 siblings meant that personal space was rare and privacy was practically non-existent. At any given moment, the house felt full full of noise, full of movement, full of responsibilities large and small. Yet within that fullness, we learned cooperation. We learned to share not only food and clothing, but burdens and expectations. A large family teaches a person that life is not arranged around one's own desires, but around the needs of many. It teaches patience, and it teaches humility. These lessons stayed with me long after childhood and played no small part in shaping the public servant I would later become. We moved frequently due to my father's pastoral assignments. Each new town brought unfamiliar faces, new schoolrooms, and routines that changed just as soon as they began to feel familiar. As a boy, I found these constant transitions unsettling. I had barely settled into one place when it was time to uproot and begin again. But change has a way of teaching resilience. I learned to observe before I acted, to listen before I spoke. I learned the value of understanding the people around me before trying to find my place among them. These early experiences instilled in me a quiet temperament, not out of shyness, but out of a growing awareness that careful observation often revealed more than loud declarations. Our financial circumstances were always precarious. The modest salary of a minister was never enough to provide comfort, and there were months when even necessities felt uncertain. Yet my parents handled these hardships with dignity. When the pantry grew bare, there was no panic, only prudent planning. When the winter grew harsh, we gathered around the small stove, grateful for warmth even in scarcity. These moments, though difficult, taught me an important truth. The value of a thing is not measured by abundance, but by necessity. What we lacked made what we had feel all the more meaningful. My schooling was irregular. I attended local academies when our finances allowed it, but many lessons came from our household. Books passed down, stories read aloud in the evenings, and my father's quiet insistence that learning was not a privilege, but a responsibility. Paper was precious, ink even more so, and we reused whatever scraps we could find. Many of my earliest writings were pinned on the blank margins of old sermons or the reverse sides of discarded pamphlets. I learned not only letters and arithmetic, but the discipline of making do with what one has. Later in life, when people marveled at my work ethic or self-reliance, they seldom realized that those traits were not extraordinary. They were simply the remnants of a childhood where effort was constant and resources scarce. As I entered my teenage years, my father's health began to decline. His once energetic stride slowed, his voice softened, and his duties became increasingly difficult to fulfill. It is a strange thing to witness the weakening of a figure who once seemed immovable. I saw my mother care for him with increasing concern, doing her best to maintain the household while shielding us from the full weight of her worry. But children are not as unaware as adults often believe. We felt the tension in the air, the unspoken fear that grew with each passing week. When he passed away, the loss was not only personal, it was practical. His death left our family without income, without stability, and with decisions that none of us felt prepared to make. Grief is heavy enough on its own, but grief coupled with uncertainty is something altogether different. In those days, I learned what it meant for responsibility to shift suddenly and irrevocably. I was still young, but the world no longer treated me as a boy. Circumstances demanded that I step into adulthood long before I felt ready. We relocated to Buffalo, New York, hoping for better prospects. The journey itself felt symbolic, a departure from the familiar world of my childhood and an entrance into a harsher, more demanding reality. Buffalo was not a large city at the time, but to me it felt vast, strange, and indifferent. It did not offer comfort, nor did it wait for me to adjust. It simply presented itself as a place where survival required effort, and where no one cared much for the troubles a young man carried with him. At 17, I sought work wherever it could be found. My first jobs were simple and unremarkable: assistant clerical work, odd labor, tasks that required little skill but plenty of endurance. Each day taught me something new about diligence, responsibility, and humility. I learned that work, even when monotonous or difficult, carried a certain dignity. It offered structure to my life and allowed me to contribute, in some small way, to my family's survival. These years were not glamorous, but they were formative. They stripped away any illusions I may have held about the world and replaced them with realism, perseverance, and a growing sense of purpose. Yet even in the midst of hardship, I found moments of clarity. I discovered that I was willing to work harder than most, not because I sought praise or advancement, but because I understood the consequences of failure. When one has known genuine scarcity, the fear of idleness becomes a powerful motivator. And when one has carried real responsibility at a young age, ambition becomes secondary to duty. Looking back now, I see that this period of my life, marked by uncertainty, fatigue, and quiet resolve, did more to shape my future than any later achievement. These early years taught me not only how to endure difficulty, but how to grow from it. That lesson would guide me through the challenges of public office, the weight of national responsibility, and the moral decisions that defined my presidency. But at the time, I knew none of that. I was simply a young man, working hard because life demanded it, and learning slowly, quietly, and often painfully what it meant to become an adult. When our family settled in Buffalo, I found myself standing at a crossroads I had never anticipated. I had no formal degree, no wealth, and no clear path forward. The life I had imagined as a boy, a life guided by steady routine, modest comfort, and the example of my father, was suddenly gone. Yet in the midst of that uncertainty, I felt a quiet determination forming within me, a sense that the only way to honor the sacrifices of my parents was to make something of myself. Even if I did not yet know what that something was, Buffalo in those days was not the bustling city it would later become. It was growing, slowly, unevenly, and often chaotically. The air carried the smell of industry, of lake winds, of opportunity mixed with hardship. People came from all directions seeking work, seeking fortune, or simply seeking survival. I was no different. What set me apart was not ambition, but necessity. I needed work, and I needed it quickly. My first position in the city was at the Institute for the Blind, where I served as an assistant teacher. The work was steady, though humble, and it taught me patience and empathy in ways I had never experienced. The students, each navigating a world far more challenging than my own, carried themselves with a kind of courage that left a deep impression on me. Their determination to learn despite overwhelming obstacles reminded me that hardship, however difficult, was not an excuse for surrender. I earned little in that role, but I gained something more valuable, a clearer understanding of human dignity and a reaffirmation of my belief that every person deserves fairness and opportunity. Still, I knew the position was not permanent. It was a stepping stone, and I treated it as such. My evenings were not spent in leisure. I read constantly. Law books borrowed, essays copied by hand, newspapers studied line by line. I had not yet decided to pursue a legal career, but I felt myself pulled in that direction, drawn by the clarity, the logic, and the sense of order that the law provided. More than anything, I was drawn to the discipline of it. The law demanded precision, honesty, and perseverance, qualities I had been raised to value. Eventually, through a fortunate connection with my uncle, I secured a position as a clerk at the law firm of Rogers, Bowen and Rogers. I was not hired for my knowledge. I had very little at the time, but for my reliability and willingness to work. The office was a different world from anything I had known. Shelves lined with volumes, desks covered in legal documents, and conversations filled with the complexities of the cases they handled. I observed everything. I read whatever I could access, often staying long after my duties ended just to study the documents left on the desks. There was no official instruction. I learned by immersion, by repetition, and by sheer determination. The partners at the firm were demanding but fair. They did not praise often, but they recognized effort. When they realized I would work late into the night without complaint, they entrusted me with increasingly important tasks: copying briefs, organizing files, preparing documents. My salary was small, but every dollar mattered. I lived frugally, spending most of my earnings on food, books, and the occasional new set of clothes when mine were worn beyond repair. I never considered these sacrifices burdens. They were investments in the future I hoped to build. The more I learned, the more I felt drawn to the profession. There was a sense of purpose in the work that resonated deeply with me. Law was not merely a matter of rules, it was a matter of justice. It demanded clarity, honesty, and a firm commitment to doing what was right, even when the easier path was more tempting. I found myself thinking about the law even in my moments away from the office. I thought about the fairness my father preached, the perseverance my mother exemplified, and the responsibilities that adulthood had thrust upon me. A legal career felt like an extension of those values. After several years of study and diligent work, I was admitted to the bar. The moment was not accompanied by fanfare or celebration. I simply closed the book I had been reading, stepped outside into the cool air, and felt the quiet satisfaction of achieving something through my own effort, without privilege, without shortcuts, and without expectation of reward. It marked the beginning of my professional life, and though I did not know it then, it also marked the first steps toward a future in public service that in my early years as a lawyer were far from glamorous. I handled whatever cases came my way, small disputes, modest civil matters, the occasional criminal defense. I learned to listen carefully to clients, many of whom were ordinary people facing extraordinary difficulties. Their stories reminded me that justice is not an abstract ideal, it is a daily necessity. Every case mattered, not because of the potential fee, but because it affected a real person's life. In those years, I built not only my legal skills, but my reputation, one of reliability, honesty, and a commitment to fairness that did not waver. That I lived simply. My office was plain. My days were long and often exhausting. Yet I found fulfillment in the work. I found purpose in the discipline, clarity in the effort, and a growing sense that this profession, demanding as it was, suited the person I was becoming. Law taught me to think carefully, to speak deliberately, and to act with integrity even when no one was watching. These principles would one day guide my decisions as mayor, governor, and president. But at the time, I was only beginning to understand their significance. With each passing year, I grew more committed to my work and more aware of the responsibilities it carried. I never sought attention or recognition, but I learned that doing one's duty with consistency eventually draws notice on its own. My reputation spread slowly, quietly, and steadily, built not on grand gestures, but on small acts of fairness repeated day after day. Looking back, I see that these years were foundational. They were the years in which I learned not only how to practice law, but how to navigate the complexities of human nature and public trust. As I reflect on that period, I see now that the hardships of my early life, the poverty, the uncertainty, the sudden transition into adulthood, were not obstacles, but preparation. They shaped my resolve, sharpened my discipline, and deepened my understanding of the responsibilities that would eventually come to define my public career. In the modest office of a Buffalo law firm, I was not yet aware of the path ahead, but I was learning the habits, the values, and the discipline that would guide me through every challenge to come. As my years in Buffalo progressed, my legal practice became not only a profession but a window into the needs of the community around me. I had arrived in the city as a young man searching for stability, yet over time, I found myself increasingly aware of the broader responsibilities that lay beyond my personal ambitions. Buffalo was growing rapidly, its streets filled with newcomers, its industries expanding, and its challenges rising just as quickly. With growth came disorder, and with disorder came the need for people willing to dedicate themselves to fairness and honest purpose. That I had never imagined a future in public service. Politics, as it was commonly understood in those days, seemed too often influenced by self-interest and corrupted by those who placed personal gain above public good. But my legal work brought me into contact with people who found themselves harmed not only by disputes with their neighbors or employers, but by decisions made in the shadows of local government. I saw how the failures of public institutions affected real families, how dishonest officials could cause suffering even more severe than any court case I handled. That it was during this time that friends and colleagues began encouraging me to consider a role in public life. They believed that my straightforward manner, my commitment to honesty, and my refusal to bend under pressure would make me an effective servant of the people. At first, I resisted their suggestions. I was not a man who sought attention, and I felt no desire to involve myself in the political contests that so often tarnish the reputations of decent individuals. Yet the more I saw of the city's struggles, the more I felt that stepping forward might be less a choice than a responsibility. My first significant opportunity came when I was asked to serve as Assistant District Attorney of Erie County. It was a position that would test my resolve and require me to confront wrongdoing directly. Accepting the role meant entering a realm where justice was often contested, where pressure could be intense, and where standing firm might come at personal cost. But I understood the stakes. I understood that law, when applied with integrity, could protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable. And so, despite my initial reluctance, I accepted, serving as assistant district attorney opened my eyes in ways I had not expected. I encountered cases that revealed the city's strengths and weaknesses alike. Families torn apart by tragedy, workers exploited by those in positions of authority, and individuals who turned to crime out of desperation rather than malice. Each case reminded me that justice could not be delivered by sentiment or personal preference. It required clarity, discipline, and a steadfast adherence to the truth. I approached each trial with the same principles I had learned in my youth. Work diligently, speak honestly, and let the results follow from the facts rather than from ambition. My efforts did not go unnoticed. Some praised my straightforward approach, while others found it inconvenient. I discovered that integrity, though valued by many, could be unsettling to those who benefited from the murkier corners of public life. Yet I remained unmoved. My duty was not to please, but to serve. Each day in the district attorney's office strengthened my belief that government, at its best, should mirror the honesty of the people it represents. If it fails to do so, it betrays the trust that forms the foundation of a free society. This early stage of my public life was not marked by grand speeches or bold promises. Instead, it was shaped by quiet determination, by long hours spent reviewing files, by careful arguments made before the court, and by a growing sense that I had stepped onto a path from which I could not easily turn away. The work was demanding, but it felt purposeful. And for the first time, I began to see that my commitment to fairness, rooted in my upbringing and sharpened by my legal career, might serve not only my clients, but my entire community. As I continued my work, something within me shifted. I no longer saw public service as a burden or an intrusion into my private ambitions. I saw it as a natural extension of the life I had lived, a life shaped by duty, responsibility, and an unwavering belief in the importance of honest conduct. Though I could not yet glimpse the full extent of the journey ahead, I sensed that the choices I made during this period would shape the future in ways I could not foresee. As I look back on the trajectory that carried me from a modest upbringing in upstate New York to a position of influence in Buffalo, I often marvel at how unremarkable the path seemed while I was walking it. Nothing in my youth or early adulthood suggested I was destined for the presidency. I held no grand designs, made no secret plans for future power, and gave little thought to the world of politics. My concerns were practical, immediate, and grounded in the responsibilities that lay directly before me. Earning a living, supporting my family, and finding a way to contribute meaningfully to the community around me. After my father died, the burden of helping provide for my mother and siblings shaped my early choices. I often worked long hours, taking whatever jobs I could find. When I finally pursued the study of law in Buffalo, I approached it with the same seriousness I gave to every task. I knew that the law could offer me a stable career, but more importantly, I found myself drawn to its clarity, its insistence on fairness, order, and fact. As a young clerk in a bustling law office, I spent countless nights poring over case files by lamplight, copying documents by hand, and learning to think with precision. I did not yet understand that these long nights were preparing me for something far greater than a simple legal career. Buffalo in those days was a city coming into its own, alive with industry and opportunity. The waterfront bustled, the railroads hummed with movement, and new businesses were rising as quickly as the people who supported them. Yet with this growth came disorder, problems that demanded sober, patient attention. Crime was not uncommon. Disputes between workers and owners were frequent, and political corruption, while not always overt, had taken root in certain corners of local government. I watched all of this with growing concern, feeling an urge to bring structure and accountability where chaos threatened to prevail. When I completed my legal studies and passed the bar, I opened a small practice. It was modest, nothing grand, but it allowed me to serve the everyday needs of the people around me. Day after day, clients came seeking help, a dispute over land, a contract that had gone wrong, an accusation that needed fair examination. I learned quickly that justice does not depend on high-profile cases. It depends on consistency, on giving each person the same level of attention, regardless of their wealth, status, or influence. This simple belief, which guided me throughout my entire career, began to earn me a reputation in Buffalo. I was a man who could be relied upon to do his duty honestly. My interest in public service was not born from ambition, but from necessity. The problems facing our city needed men willing to confront them without fear or favor. When the opportunity arose for me to run for sheriff of Erie County, friends urged me to step forward. At first, I hesitated. The role was demanding, politically charged, and required an unyielding commitment to law enforcement. But in the end, the principle that had guided me all my life prevailed. If there was work to be done, someone must do it. And if I was capable, I had no right to refuse. Serving as sheriff was one of the most difficult periods of my early career. The responsibilities were immense and often heavy. I oversaw the county jail, managed the deputies, and ensured that sentences handed down by the courts were carried out faithfully. The work exposed me to the harsher side of human nature, violence, desperation, and the consequences of poor choices. It was during this time that I performed one of the most solemn duties I ever faced, supervising executions. While deeply sobering, I believed that my personal involvement was necessary. If the law required such acts, then its officers must not shrink from them. Delegating the responsibility simply to avoid the weight of conscience would have been an act of cowardice in my eyes. People sometimes spoke of my strictness, but I never saw my actions as harsh. I believed then, as I believe now, that the rule of law protects society only when it is carried out consistently. I treated every matter brought before me with seriousness, whether the case involved a hardened criminal, a petty thief, or a frightened family appealing for mercy. I learned that justice must be tempered with understanding, but never compromised. These years shaped me more deeply than I knew at the time. Without intending to, I became known for integrity, a reputation that would follow me throughout my life. I did not seek attention or publicity, but people noticed that I did my work quietly and faithfully. Newspapers occasionally mentioned my fairness or my insistence on doing everything by the book, though I never cared for that kind of praise. What mattered to me was simple, that when I finished a task, I could look back on it without regret. My experience as sheriff prepared me for larger responsibilities ahead. The political world in Buffalo was shifting, and people were growing weary of the corruption that had seeped into local governance. Reform was the word on everyone's lips, though few were willing to take the steps required to bring it about. When my name was raised as a potential candidate for mayor of Buffalo, I once again found myself considering a path I had not sought. But I believed firmly that a man should serve when called upon, provided he can do so with honesty. And so, with the same steady determination that had carried me through my early years, I stepped forward once more, unaware that this decision would set me on a road toward the governorship of New York and eventually the presidency of the United States. During this period, I learned something vital: that leadership is not defined by ambition, but by responsibility. It grows naturally from the work a person performs, the duties he accepts, and the trust others place in him. Those lessons would become the foundation upon which the rest of my public life was built, guiding me through every challenge that lay ahead. As my responsibilities in Buffalo continued to evolve, I found myself more deeply immersed in the currents of reform that were beginning to stir within the city. The people were growing increasingly frustrated with the inefficiencies and questionable dealings that had become all too common in local government. It seemed as though every honest citizen shared the same sentiment. The city deserved better. The emerging call for integrity and transparency resonated with me, not because I sought public influence, but because I believed in safeguarding the systems that hold communities together. When I accepted the nomination for mayor of Buffalo, I did so with a clear understanding of the magnitude of the task before me. The office was no ceremonial position. It was a daily battle against entrenched interests, careless practices, and the temptation, so prevalent in political life, to take the easier path rather than the right one. But I had no intention of yielding to convenience or political pressure. I entered the office with a simple plan: to administer the city as I had lived my life, quietly, steadily, and with unwavering honesty. One of the earliest challenges I faced involved contracts for public services. The city had long suffered from inflated prices and arrangements that benefited a handful of favored individuals rather than the community at large. Reviewing these contracts was like opening a window into a room that had been shut up far too long. Dust and neglect were everywhere. The city treasury was strained, public works were mismanaged, and citizens were paying the price. I refused to approve any contract that did not serve the people fairly, even when powerful interests urged me to sign without questions. My vetoes were not acts of defiance, but acts of duty, expressions of my belief that public money must be treated with the same care one gives to personal funds. Some accused me of being stubborn or overly strict, but I was unbothered by such criticisms. In my view, an honest administrator cannot be swayed by political convenience. Each veto carried its own set of consequences, yet none of them shook my conviction. The people of Buffalo quickly took notice, not because I made speeches boasting of reform, but because they saw reforms being made. Streets were repaved, services improved, and funds handled responsibly. For the first time in years, there was a sense of confidence in local government. The office demanded long days and often longer nights. I reviewed records, studied proposals, and met with citizens who brought forth complaints or suggestions. These ordinary men and women taught me more than any political advisor ever could. They voiced their frustrations with clarity, and they expressed their hopes for a city that treated them fairly. Their trust in me became a source of strength. It reminded me that leadership does not rest upon grand gestures, but upon the willingness to listen and respond with sincerity. What surprised me most during this period was how often I encountered resistance not from the public, but from those within the political establishment. There were individuals who saw my approach as a threat to their influence. They whispered that I was too honest, a description that always struck me as peculiar. How could a public servant be too honest? Surely honesty is the foundation on which all public responsibility should rest. Yet the more I insisted on fairness, the louder the opposition grew. Despite these challenges, the reform movement gained momentum. I found myself working alongside others who were equally committed to rebuilding trust in government. Together, we sought to establish practices based not on favors or alliances, but on sound judgment and equal treatment. I believed then, and still believe now, that democracy functions best when every decision is guided by principle rather than ambition. That my time as mayor was not marked by grand victories, but by steady progress. I reduced waste, improved oversight, and defended the interests of ordinary citizens. But these accomplishments were merely the visible results. The true success, in my view, was the restoration of confidence, a reminder to the people of Buffalo that government could indeed operate with integrity. Yet it soon became clear that my work in Buffalo was only the beginning. As my reputation for honesty spread beyond the limits of the city, leaders across the state took notice. New York, like Buffalo, was grappling with corruption and inefficiency. Reformers were searching for someone who could bring order and discipline to the sprawling machinery of state government. I did not seek the attention, nor did I consider myself a seasoned politician. But as pressure mounted for me to run for governor, I once again found myself standing at a familiar crossroads. The choice between the quiet life I preferred and the public service that duty seemed to demand. That I wrestled with the decision. The governorship carried immense responsibility, far beyond anything I had previously shouldered. It required a willingness to confront entrenched political organizations and a preparedness to endure scrutiny on a scale I had never experienced. But I also knew that the work I had begun in Buffalo needed to continue on a larger stage. If integrity was to be restored in New York State, someone had to be willing to set aside comfort for the sake of principle. And so, after much reflection, I agreed to run. That I did not make campaign promises lightly. I spoke plainly, saying only what I believed I could fulfill, that I would administer the state with the same honesty and firmness that had guided me as sheriff and mayor. I was not a man of flowery speeches or flamboyant gestures. My confidence rested not in rhetoric, but in work, steady, diligent, uncompromising work. To my surprise, the people responded with enthusiasm. They were eager for moderation, honesty, and practical leadership. Their support was humbling. It reminded me of the countless individuals who had placed their trust in me throughout my early career, from my first clients in Buffalo to the citizens who had asked me to lead their city. These connections, the simple faith of ordinary people, gave me the courage to continue. When the election results were announced and I found myself chosen to serve as governor of New York, I felt not excitement, but solemn responsibility. I knew that the challenges ahead would test my character more than anything I had encountered thus far. The task of reforming state government was monumental, and the opposition would be fierce. But as I prepared to step onto that broader stage, I carried with me the lessons of every humble step that had led me there. The long nights of study, the difficult cases, the solemn duties as sheriff, the battles waged in Buffalo for fairness and transparency. These experiences had shaped me, not into a politician, but into a man determined to do what was right, no matter the cost. When I assumed the office of Governor of New York, I did so with a profound awareness of the responsibility placed upon my shoulders. New York was not simply another state. It was a vast and complicated engine of commerce, industry, and political influence. Its government touched the lives of millions, and with that reach came an immense capacity for both good and harm. Reformers had long cried out for order and accountability, yet progress had been slow, hampered by partisan divisions and a deeply entrenched political machinery that resisted every attempt at meaningful change. Stepping into the Capitol in Albany, I felt the weight of the work ahead. My experience as mayor had prepared me for corruption on a local level, but state politics operated on a vastly different scale. Factions within the legislature battled endlessly for influence, each with its own priorities, alliances, and ambitions. Lobbyists moved through the corridors with practiced confidence, pressing for favorable bills, contracts, and exemptions. Some had grown so accustomed to shaping policy from behind the scenes that they viewed any attempt to curtail their reach as a personal affront that I knew at once that my administration would not resemble those that had come before. I was not interested in political bargaining or quiet compromises. I had no desire to build a political machine of my own. My task, as I saw it, was to apply the same principles that had guided my life: honesty, firmness, and impartiality, and to trust that the public would understand the necessity of every difficult decision I made. One of the earliest tests of my governorship came in the form of legislation designed to benefit private interests at the expense of the broader public. The bill was presented with polished language and the promise of economic development, but a closer examination revealed deep flaws. It was, in essence, an attempt to exploit the resources of the state for the gain of a select few. Advisors warned me that vetoing the bill would anger powerful men whose support governors traditionally relied upon. But I did not hesitate. I vetoed it without reservation, explaining in clear terms that no measure, however cleverly disguised, should be allowed to undermine the public trust. Some praised my decision as bold, others condemned it as reckless. Political leaders who had expected cooperation from me soon realized that I could not be swayed by threats or favors. I knew they viewed me with frustration, perhaps even resentment, but their opinions had no bearing on my duty. I did not hold the governorship to please political leaders. I held it to serve the people. My administration quickly became known for these uncompromising stands. Whenever legislation seemed suspect, I examined it closely, refusing to rely on the analysis of others. I reviewed budgets line by line, investigated expenditures, and demanded transparency in every corner of state government. This insistence on accountability earned me the admiration of reformers across the nation. Newspapers began to speak of me as a man uniquely suited to the times, a leader who could restore faith in public service. Yet admiration was never what I sought. What mattered to me was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that each decision had been made with integrity. Despite the challenges, my work brought real and measurable improvements. We streamlined government departments, reformed procedures, and reduced unnecessary spending. I met with union representatives, business leaders, farmers, and ordinary citizens, seeking to understand their concerns and how the state might better support them. I found that most people, regardless of their political views, wanted the same thing: a government free from corruption, fair in its dealings, and consistent in its principles. Their support strengthened my resolve, but my vetoes and reforms soon drew national attention. Newspapers beyond New York began to print editorials praising my independence and integrity. Reform-minded citizens in states near and far wrote letters urging me to continue my work. Even those with no strong political interest found themselves drawn to the idea of a public servant who refused to be intimidated by party bosses or compromised by private interests. I found it humbling, even disquieting, for I never sought national recognition. My focus remained firmly on New York. However, the political climate of the nation was changing. Many Americans, exhausted by years of political patronage and administrative inefficiency, were searching for a leader who embodied honesty. They wanted someone who could cleanse the government of its excesses, who could assure them that public office would not be used for private gain. My work in New York seemed to offer an example of such leadership, and as months passed, whispers began circulating. Perhaps I should be considered for the highest office in the land at first. I dismissed these suggestions outright. The presidency demanded a level of exposure, scrutiny, and national engagement far beyond anything I had experienced. Moreover, I cherished my work in New York. There was still much to be done, many reforms to solidify, and countless structural issues that required sustained attention. I had no desire to leave the task unfinished, yet the calls grew louder. Party leaders argued that my reputation for honesty made me uniquely positioned to unite a divided nation. Reformers from every corner of the country insisted that the federal government desperately needed the same discipline and integrity that I had brought to New York. Letters poured into my office, some from citizens urging me to run, others from political organizations seeking reassurance that I would remain firm in my principles. I was deeply moved, but also uneasy. I knew the presidency was not a role to be taken lightly. It required not only strength and judgment, but a willingness to sacrifice privacy, comfort, and personal peace. Despite my reluctance, I could not fully ignore the possibility that my duty might once again lead me down a path I had not chosen for myself. I had learned long ago that public service often demands more than one expects, sometimes more than one desires. Whether I wished it or not, the question of the presidency would soon become impossible to avoid. As I continued my work in Albany, I often found myself reflecting late at night on the unexpected course my life had taken. From a young law clerk in Buffalo to sheriff, mayor, and now governor, each position had come to me not through ambition but through necessity, each one a response to a call for honest service. I wondered, with no small amount of apprehension, whether that same call might soon pull me toward a responsibility greater than any I had yet faced. As the months of my governorship passed, the growing national attention became impossible to ignore. At first, it arrived subtly, an editorial here, a political cartoon there, brief mentions in newspapers far from New York. But with each passing week, the tone grew louder and more insistent. Reformers across the country seemed to view my tenure in Albany as a model of what the American Republic could and should be. They saw in my actions a restoration of the principles that had animated our nation's founders: simplicity, honesty, and a firm commitment to the public good. But while the outside world speculated about my future, I remained focused on the present responsibilities of my office. My days were filled with meetings, legislative reviews, and discussions with citizens whose lives were directly affected by the decisions made in Albany. I felt a profound duty to maintain the trust placed in me by the people of New York. The speculation surrounding my political future threatened to distract from that work, and I took great care not to let it interfere with my decision-making. Still, the whispers persisted that it was during this time that I came to fully understand the immense power of public perception. People seemed eager, almost desperate, for a leader who could restore integrity to national politics. They had grown weary of corruption, political favors, and bureaucratic stagnation. The idea that someone could rise from humble origins, refuse the pressures of political machines, and govern with unwavering principle held a certain appeal. Many saw my career as proof that such leadership was still possible. Yet, the possibility of running for president did not excite me. It troubled me. I had never been comfortable with public attention or political ambition. My life had been shaped by duty, not desire. When I accepted the governorship, it was because I believed my experience and temperament could serve the people of New York. But the presidency was different. It carried responsibilities so vast, so complex, that the very thought of seeking the office felt overwhelming. Nonetheless, political allies and advisors began to visit me with increasing frequency. They spoke of the national mood, of the deep hunger for reform, and of the unique opportunity presented by the coming election. They insisted that my principles, once considered mere personal virtues, had become political assets. I listened politely, but I offered no commitments. I was not yet convinced that such a path was right. One evening, after a long day of reviewing legislation, I sat alone in the governor's office. The lamplight cast long shadows across the papers and reports that filled my desk. Outside, the Capitol building stood silent, its grand columns illuminated by the faint glow of the city beyond. As I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion pressing heavily upon me. I allowed myself to reflect more honestly on the possibility before me. What did I truly fear? It was not the labor. I had never shied away from hard work. Nor was it the scrutiny, though that too was considerable. What troubled me most was the possibility of failing the people who placed their trust in me. The presidency was not simply another office. It was a solemn obligation to uphold the Constitution, protect the nation, and guide the Republic with steadiness and wisdom. If I accepted such a responsibility, I needed to be certain that I could fulfill it honorably. The decision weighed on me for weeks. Meanwhile, the work of reform continued. I vetoed bills that favored narrow interests over the public good, restructured aging departments, and strengthened systems of oversight and accountability. Each of these actions, though necessary, generated friction with entrenched political factions. Some party leaders began to distance themselves from me, fearing that my independence threatened their influence. Others, however, saw my firmness as an asset, proof that I could not be manipulated by the shifting winds of politics. As these tensions grew, the national conversation intensified. Delegates began whispering my name at conventions. Editorials praised my determination. Ordinary citizens wrote letters expressing their longing for a leader who could be trusted to act not out of ambition, but out of principle. And then, the turning point arrived at a delegation of reform-minded leaders from across the country traveled to Albany to speak with me directly. They were sincere, earnest individuals, men who believed that the strength of the nation depended on the restoration of honesty in its highest office. They spoke passionately about the dangers of corruption in Washington, the need for accountability, and the importance of having a president who valued the public good above personal or political gain. Their words moved me, not because they flattered me, but because they reminded me of why I had entered public service in the first place. They appealed not to ambition, but to responsibility. They asked me to consider not what I wanted, but what the nation needed. That night, I walked alone through the quiet halls of the governor's mansion. I paused to look out across the darkened city, thinking of the citizens who had placed their trust in me, the countless individuals whose lives were touched by the decisions made in Albany. I thought of my earlier years, of the long nights spent studying law, of the difficult choices as sheriff, of the battles in Buffalo for fairness and transparency. A pattern had emerged through the years, one I had not sought but could not deny. I was repeatedly called to serve when the need arose. By the time dawn approached, my decision had taken shape. I would not seek the presidency for personal gain or recognition. I would do so only if called upon by the people, and only with the intention of serving them with the same honesty that had guided my life. And so, when the party delegation later returned to ask for my acceptance, I agreed, not with excitement, but with solemn commitment. I knew the road ahead would be difficult. I knew the campaign would be grueling, the scrutiny intense, and the expectations immense. But I also knew that I could not turn away from a responsibility simply because it was daunting. As I prepared to step onto the national stage, I carried with me the same guiding belief that had defined my career, that the strength of a republic depends not on the ambition of its leaders, but on their willingness to place duty above all else. The months leading to the national convention were unlike anything I had experienced before. My life, once governed by steady routines and measured responsibilities, suddenly became a whirlwind of letters, meetings, and constant speculation. Newspapers across the country printed my name with increasing frequency, often with headlines that felt far too large for the man I believed myself to be. Some hailed me as a symbol of honesty in troubled times. Others dismissed me as an anomaly, too rigid, too principled, too unwilling to bend to the unwritten rules of political life. Yet, in the midst of all this noise, I remained as I always had been, a man trying simply to do what was right. I often found myself reflecting on the extraordinary path that had brought me here. It seemed hardly believable that a man who once walked the streets of Buffalo with little more than ambition and a sense of duty could now stand at the edge of national leadership. I had not sought such a position. I had not crafted grand strategies or cultivated powerful allies. My rise had come through the trust of ordinary citizens, people who believed that their government could and should be honest. Their faith humbled me, and it strengthened my resolve to honor that trust no matter where the road might lead. As the convention approached, political leaders continued to visit me in Albany, each offering advice, predictions, and strategies for what lay ahead. I listened respectfully, though my mind often drifted to deeper concerns. The presidency was not merely an office, it was a turning point in a nation's story. To accept such a role required more than political skill. It demanded character, patience, and the willingness to carry burdens that few could truly comprehend. That I knew well that entering the national arena meant stepping into a realm where every word would be scrutinized, every decision questioned, every action interpreted through the shifting lens of political rivalry. Yet, as daunting as these realities were, I could not escape the growing conviction that the nation needed a steady hand, someone who could rise above factional interests and place the welfare of the republic first. Whether or not I was the right person for such a task was not mine to decide. That choice belonged to the people. In the weeks before the convention, I found solace in quiet moments, brief pauses amid the chaos where I could gather my thoughts and steel my resolve. I read the letters sent by citizens from across the country, farmers in the Midwest hoping for fairness, families in the East yearning for stability, workers in the growing industrial centers pleading for honesty and order. Their messages reminded me that leadership is not measured by power, but by service. If I was to step forward, it would be for them and for the nation that bound us all together. When the day finally arrived and I traveled to the convention hall, I did so with a calm acceptance. Whatever happened, victory or defeat, I would meet it with the same steady heart that had guided me throughout my life. I reminded myself that the office itself was not the goal. The goal was the preservation of integrity, the protection of our institutions, and the pursuit of good government. And as the hall filled with delegates, applause, debate, and the restless energy of democracy in motion, I felt not the weight of ambition but the gravity of duty. As the national convention drew near, the sense of responsibility pressed upon me more heavily than I had anticipated. I had faced challenges before, in Buffalo and as governor of New York, yet the scale of what lay ahead was entirely different. Every action, every word, and even moments of silence would be weighed in public judgment. It was not simply about policy or legislation. It was about trust, perception, and the fragile faith of a nation that had seen too many leaders compromise principle for convenience. That I spent countless hours reviewing correspondence from supporters and concerned citizens alike. Letters arrived from every corner of the country. Farmers, factory workers, small business owners, and families seeking fairness in their dealings with government. Their concerns were simple, yet profound, demonstrating a need for honest governance, for leaders who understood that public office is a trust, not a reward. Reading these letters, I felt the full weight of my responsibility. The hopes and aspirations of ordinary Americans were now part of the decision I would soon make. Meanwhile, political operatives and party leaders sought my audience with increasing urgency. Their counsel was offered in measured tones, yet their expectations were clear. They recognized in me the potential to unite a fragmented party and appeal to reform-minded citizens who had grown disillusioned with political corruption. But their strategies and maneuvers, though well-intentioned in their eyes, were foreign to me. I had no desire to manipulate opinion, to indulge in patronage, or to make concessions that would betray principle. Each suggestion I received was filtered through the same question. Does this serve the people honestly, or does it serve only ambition? If the answer leaned toward personal or political gain, I declined without hesitation. At times, I found myself retreating to moments of solitude, seeking clarity in a world that had suddenly become overwhelming. Walking through the quiet halls of my residence in Albany, I reflected on the path that had brought me to this point. From a young lawyer in Buffalo, to sheriff, to mayor, and then governor, each step had been taken not in pursuit of fame or power, but from a sense of duty. And now, as the presidency loomed on the horizon, I realized that this path might demand more than I had ever imagined. Yet it was a call I could not ignore. The convention hall itself was a spectacle unlike anything I had experienced. Delegates filled the room with a mixture of anticipation, debate, and occasional discord. I observed their deliberations, aware that their decisions would echo far beyond the walls of that chamber. Every speech, every motion, every alliance formed in those moments carried implications that could shape the nation for years to come. It was a sobering thought, yet one that reinforced my resolve to act with honesty and consistency. Throughout these days, I relied heavily on the lessons learned in earlier offices. The patience required to navigate the bureaucracies of Buffalo and New York State was essential here. Understanding human nature, the balance of ambition and idealism, of fear and hope, proved invaluable. I listened carefully, questioned thoroughly, and resisted the temptation to react impulsively to political pressure. This was not a contest of ego. It was a responsibility to ensure that the future of the nation rested in capable, principled hands. One evening, as the convention approached its critical votes, I sat alone reflecting on the broader significance of what was unfolding. I thought of my family, my friends, and the citizens who had entrusted me with governance at every previous stage of my life. I understood that to step forward now would not be an act of personal ambition, but a continuation of the service I had long undertaken. The stakes were immense, but so too was the opportunity to demonstrate that integrity and public trust could guide leadership even on the grandest stage. It was also clear that this moment would test more than my resolve. It would test the public's faith in principle over partisanship. Factions within the party were eager to assert influence, and some questioned whether a man so committed to honesty could navigate the complex web of national politics. I took these doubts not as offense, but as a challenge, a reminder that leadership is measured not in words or promises, but in deeds and the steadfast application of principle, regardless of opposition. The hours leading to the convention's decision were long and contemplative. I reviewed every aspect of my public record, every decision I had made in Buffalo and Albany, and considered how these experiences prepared me to serve a nation in need. I did not dwell on ambition, for I had learned that ambition can blind judgment. Instead, I focused on the question of duty. Could I lead the country in a way that honored the trust placed in me? Could I remain steadfast in principle when confronted with the temptations and pressures of the presidency? In the end, the answer became clear. I would not seek the office for personal gain, but I would accept it if called upon, understanding that the responsibility was larger than any one man, and that integrity must guide action at every step. With that certainty, I prepared to meet the convention, knowing that the path ahead would be both challenging and consequential, but also guided by the same commitment to fairness and duty that had carried me from Buffalo to Albany and now toward the national stage. As the convention progressed, the intensity of political maneuvering became apparent. Delegates debated tirelessly, some driven by loyalty to factions, others by reformist ideals. I observed quietly, understanding that my own role was not to dominate the discussions, but to remain consistent in principle, prepared to act when the time came. Every conversation, every alliance formed or broken, reminded me that leadership required patience and discernment. One must know when to speak and when to remain silent, letting integrity do the speaking in one's stead. During this period, I received an influx of letters and messages from citizens across the nation. Farmers in the Midwest expressed hope for fair treatment in government programs. Laborers in growing cities asked for protection against exploitation. Families everywhere sought reassurance that national leadership could be trusted. These voices reinforced what I already knew. The presidency was not merely a political office. It was a commitment to safeguard the welfare and confidence of the people. Their faith, though sometimes invisible, demanded careful consideration and an unwavering moral compass. Political advisors pressed me to make speeches, engage with media, and cultivate public enthusiasm. I listened, though I remained wary of theatrics or exaggeration. Leadership, I believed, should be demonstrated through actions and a steady record, not through rhetoric or flamboyant gestures. Every speech I gave was measured, every statement weighed carefully for truth and clarity. I had learned in Buffalo and Albany that the public responds not to promises alone, but to evidence of integrity and consistent effort. As delegates began to coalesce around potential candidates, it became clear that my reputation for honesty and reform had elevated me above the fray. Some party leaders, initially skeptical, now saw me as a unifying figure capable of bridging divisions between factions. Reformers and citizens alike began to rally, viewing me as a symbol of the kind of leadership that placed principle above personal or partisan gain. The support was humbling, yet it also carried the weight of immense responsibility. I reminded myself constantly, it is one thing to be chosen. It is quite another to lead honorably once chosen that I also reflected on the burdens of the office I was about to undertake. The presidency demands constant decision-making, often in circumstances where information is incomplete and pressures immense. The consequences of misjudgment extend beyond individuals or states. They can shape the very future of the nation. These thoughts did not intimidate me, but they reinforced the seriousness of the choice. Leadership is not measured by comfort or convenience, but by the willingness to act rightly. Even under strain. One evening, after days of deliberation, I walked alone in the quiet corridors of the convention hall. The flickering gas lamps cast long shadows, and the murmurs of debate echoed faintly through empty passageways. I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had led me here, from a small-town lawyer in Buffalo to sheriff, mayor, and governor, each step guided by duty rather than desire. Now, standing on the threshold of the presidency, I felt the gravity of the moment more keenly than ever. I understood that accepting the nomination was not an act of ambition, but a continuation of a life committed to service. Each decision I had made, whether in the courtroom, in city government, or at the state level, was preparation for this larger responsibility. I had learned to resist pressure, to act with integrity, and to put principle above expediency. These lessons, tested over decades, would be my guide as I stepped onto the national stage. The final moments of the convention were filled with anticipation and deliberation. Delegates gathered, votes were cast, and the murmurs of discussion reached a crescendo. I remained calm, relying on the same steadiness that had carried me through countless difficult decisions in Buffalo and Albany. When my name was finally called, it was not a triumph of personal ambition, but a solemn acknowledgement of duty. I accepted, not with celebration, but with quiet resolve, fully aware of the work, challenges, and scrutiny that lay ahead. The journey from a young lawyer to the threshold of the presidency had been shaped not by desire for power, but by the persistent call of responsibility. At each stage, I had acted not for applause or recognition, but to serve the public faithfully and fairly. And as I prepared to address the nation, I reminded myself that the true measure of leadership is not in titles or accolades, but in the unwavering commitment to serve with honesty, diligence, and an unshakable sense of duty. With the nomination secured, I began the long and arduous path of preparing for the campaign, understanding that every decision, every speech, and every interaction would be a reflection not just of myself, but of the principles I had dedicated my life to uphold. The task ahead was daunting, yet I felt ready. For a life guided by integrity, shaped by service, and tempered through experience, had prepared me to meet this challenge with the same steadfastness that had defined every step of my journey. The moment I officially became the nominee for the presidency, a new chapter of responsibility opened before me, one that dwarfed anything I had experienced as governor. The scale of the office, the scrutiny of the public, and the weight of expectation were immense. I was no longer a servant of a single city or state, but a potential steward of an entire nation, with millions looking to see if honesty and principle could indeed prevail in the highest office. The early days of the campaign were both exhilarating and exhausting. Travel across the states, meetings with party leaders, appearances before citizens, and correspondence from citizens filled every hour. Each event reminded me that the presidency was far more than a position of prestige. It was a covenant with the people, an agreement to serve faithfully, to place the welfare of the nation above personal comfort, and to uphold the Constitution even when it conflicted with popular opinion or political advantage. Letters arrived daily, many from people I would never meet, yet whose trust weighed heavily on me. Farmers wrote with concerns about tariffs and trade policies. Laborers expressed hope that national leadership could protect fairness in their wages and working conditions. Citizens from both cities and rural areas shared fears about corruption, mismanagement, and the growing distance between government and the people it was meant to serve. Reading these messages, I understood that the presidency demanded not only administrative skill, but moral steadiness. Every decision, every statement, had consequences that rippled far beyond immediate perception. That I quickly realized that the campaign would test patience as much as resolve. Political opponents were numerous and vocal, some questioning my experience, others attempting to exploit minor errors or misstatements. I had faced opposition in Buffalo and Albany, but the national stage magnified every detail. My temperament, developed over decades of public service, became my greatest asset. I approached each challenge with calm reflection, never rushing to respond out of anger or pride. To lead effectively, one must first master oneself. That a central focus of my campaign was honesty. I refused to make promises that could not be fulfilled, and I spoke openly about my intentions to govern with principle rather than political expediency. It was a simple message, yet it resonated deeply. Citizens had grown weary of leaders who manipulated words, engaged in patronage, or favored the few over the many. They sought integrity, consistency, and fairness, qualities I had cultivated through every stage of my career. It was gratifying, though humbling, to see that a life guided by principle could find resonance on such a vast scale. During this period, I also reflected on the immense historical significance of the moment. The nation had faced periods of crisis, reform, and division before, yet each generation demanded leaders capable of balancing duty with vision. I understood that the decisions I would make in office could shape not just policy, but the public's confidence in government itself. It was a responsibility that could not be approached lightly. The demands of travel, speeches, and public appearances were grueling, yet they provided insight into the hopes and concerns of citizens from every region. I listened carefully, understanding that true leadership requires hearing voices beyond one's immediate circle. In small towns, I saw firsthand the challenges faced by families working the land. In growing cities, I witnessed the struggles of laborers and the emerging middle class. These encounters strengthened my conviction that the presidency must serve all Americans, not merely the powerful or influential. As the campaign progressed, my advisors suggested strategies, messaging, and compromises that could secure votes. I listened attentively, but was careful to ensure that every decision aligned with my principles. There were moments when the easier path tempted me, when bending slightly might have made politics more convenient. But I reminded myself that leadership is defined by integrity, not expedience. To govern effectively, one must act consistently with values, even when faced with short-term obstacles or opposition. Evenings were often spent in quiet reflection. In solitude, I considered not only the mechanics of the campaign, but the moral and ethical dimensions of leadership. The presidency, I realized, was not merely administrative, it was symbolic. It represented the nation's aspirations, the trust placed by citizens, and the enduring promise that government could act justly and honorably. These reflections grounded me, providing clarity amid the tumult and uncertainty of national politics. When the first ballots were cast, I understood that the campaign's outcome would be the culmination of not just political strategy, but a lifetime of decisions rooted in duty and principle. I could not control the result, yet I could ensure that every action I had taken, every speech, every policy explanation, every encounter with citizens, was guided by honesty and service. In that awareness, I found a steady resolve that carried me forward, ready to meet whatever challenges lay ahead with the same steadfastness that had defined every stage of my life. As the campaign advanced toward its critical moments, I became increasingly aware of the immense responsibility that came with each interaction, each speech, and each appearance before the public. I was no longer addressing merely a city or a state, but a nation with diverse interests, varied concerns, and high expectations. From rural farmers to urban laborers, from business leaders to ordinary citizens, all eyes were on those who aspired to the presidency, hoping that the individual chosen would safeguard the principles of fairness, justice, and integrity. The opposition was fierce and unrelenting. My competitors questioned my experience, criticized my positions, and attempted to exploit any perceived weakness. I anticipated such challenges, but the scale of their intensity was staggering. National campaigns are unlike any local or state political contest. Every word, gesture, or pause is dissected and interpreted. I reminded myself daily that my duty was not to react to every provocation, but to maintain a consistent course guided by principle and reason. Impulsive responses would serve neither the campaign nor the nation. Throughout this period, correspondence from citizens became a source of both guidance and inspiration. Men and women wrote to me not to flatter, but to express their hopes, concerns, and expectations for the future. Some feared the corruption that had long plagued government. Others sought reform in the administration of laws and public resources. Still others wanted assurance that the federal government would act justly and protect the rights of all citizens, regardless of status or wealth. I read these letters with care, allowing the voices of the people to guide my decisions, speeches, and policy explanations. In this way, the campaign became not just a contest for votes, but an extension of the service I had dedicated my life to. Campaign travel was exhausting, yet profoundly illuminating. I visited towns and cities across the nation, observing firsthand the lives of those who would be affected by the decisions of a president. In small farming communities, I saw families contending with market pressures and natural hardships. In industrial centers, I witnessed the challenges faced by workers striving to support their households. These experiences reinforced my belief that government must act equitably and with attention to all citizens, not merely the powerful or politically connected. Leadership, I understood, is measured not in prestige, but in service and responsiveness to the people. During public appearances, I remained mindful of the delicate balance between conveying conviction and listening attentively. It was not enough to speak, one must also hear. I listened to questions, concerns, and criticisms, taking care to respond honestly and directly. The public's trust, I realized, is earned through consistent demonstration of integrity rather than rhetorical flourish. Every interaction offered an opportunity to demonstrate that a life guided by principle could translate into governance capable of serving the nation faithfully. Political advisors occasionally pressed me to adopt tactics designed to sway opinion more aggressively, to appeal to partisan divisions, or to embellish my positions for maximum impact. I declined these strategies, believing that expedience must never outweigh principle. The essence of leadership, I reminded myself, lies in the courage to act rightly, even when such actions are inconvenient or unpopular. I had learned this lesson in Buffalo and Albany, and it remained the cornerstone of my approach to the presidency. Nights were often long and reflective. In solitude, I considered the responsibilities I might soon assume, weighing not ambition, but duty. The presidency is more than an office. It is a symbol of the nation's ideals, the embodiment of public trust, and a repository of the hopes of millions. To occupy such a position requires not only practical skill, but moral clarity. I reminded myself that the measure of leadership is not found in applause or acclaim, but in steadfast adherence to principle, especially in the face of difficulty and scrutiny. As the election approached, the culmination of months of preparation, speeches, and tireless travel, I felt a deep sense of purpose. My life had been shaped by service. As a lawyer, sheriff, mayor, and governor, each role had demanded integrity, diligence, and commitment. Now, the nation itself seemed to call upon me, urging that same steadfastness on a grander scale. Whether or not the electorate ultimately chose me, I was determined to remain faithful to the principles that had guided every decision of my life: honesty, impartiality, and unwavering dedication to the public good. On election day, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me to this point. The votes cast would determine not just my personal fate, but the path of the nation. And yet, in that moment, I did not dwell on ambition or personal gain. I thought of the citizens whose lives would be shaped by honest leadership, of the ideals of fairness and justice, and of the trust they had placed in me. It was a solemn and humbling responsibility, one that I resolved to honor to the fullest extent of my ability. When the results were announced, and it became clear that the nation had placed its confidence in me, I felt neither triumph nor elation. Instead, I experienced a profound sense of duty. The presidency, I knew, was not a reward, it was a trust. The challenges ahead would test my judgment, patience, and resolve. Yet I was prepared to meet them, guided by the same steady principles that had carried me through every previous stage of public service. I understood that the true measure of leadership lies not in the accolades received, but in the faithful execution of responsibility, in service to the people, and in the enduring commitment to act always with integrity. And so, as I prepared to assume the highest office in the land, I carried with me the lessons of a lifetime: the importance of fairness, the power of principle, and the enduring responsibility that comes when one's life is dedicated to public service. It was the continuation of a journey defined not by personal ambition, but by the unwavering commitment to serve with honesty, diligence, and steadfast resolve. Assuming the presidency brought a magnitude of responsibility I had only glimpsed in theory until that moment. The machinery of the federal government was vast, intricate, and, at times, unwieldy. Each decision, no matter how seemingly minor, had ramifications that stretched across the nation. Yet, I approached the office with the same determination and principles that had guided me throughout my life: honesty, impartiality, and an unwavering commitment to serve the people rather than personal or partisan interests. The first days in office were a mixture of ceremony and immediate demands. Cabinet members, advisors, and officials flooded the executive offices with reports, recommendations, and requests. Some sought to influence policy through subtle persuasion, others through explicit pressure. I listened carefully to every counsel, but I remained steadfast in my approach. Every action must be grounded in principle, every policy evaluated on its merits and impact on the public, not political convenience. I had long understood that true leadership requires both discernment and courage, the courage to act rightly, even when it provokes resistance or criticism. One of my earliest initiatives involved reviewing the executive departments and their operations. Bureaucratic inefficiency and favoritism had crept into various offices over time, often subtly and without immediate notice. I instructed my advisors to provide detailed reports, highlighting areas where reforms could enhance transparency and accountability. For me, this was not about political advantage. It was about ensuring that government functioned efficiently, fairly, and in service to all citizens. The work was painstaking, but the results justified the effort. Systems were streamlined, redundant processes eliminated, and oversight mechanisms strengthened. Each step reinforced the principle that public trust must never be taken for granted. Beyond administrative reform, the nation faced pressing economic and social issues. Tariffs, interstate commerce, and emerging industrialization required careful consideration. I convened experts, legislators, and stakeholders to discuss policies, always with an eye toward fairness and long-term stability. Every decision carried political consequences, yet my focus remained squarely on the broader welfare of the nation. I had learned over decades of public service that true leadership is not determined by popularity, but by the ability to act rightly, especially when the path is difficult or contentious. The personal dimension of the presidency also became immediately apparent. Every action I took was scrutinized, every word dissected. Privacy, once a simple part of daily life, vanished. Even small gestures, routine appointments, or private correspondence could become matters of public interest. I quickly realized that the office demanded both resilience and humility. Resilience to withstand criticism and pressure, and humility to recognize that leadership is about service, not personal gain or recognition. These lessons, learned gradually over years in Buffalo and Albany, now proved indispensable on a national scale. Amid these administrative and personal challenges, I made a deliberate effort to remain connected to citizens' concerns. I encouraged correspondence from ordinary Americans, reviewed petitions carefully, and invited experts from diverse regions and backgrounds to provide input on pressing issues. It became clear that effective governance relies on a two-way relationship between the office of the presidency and the public it serves. Decisions must be informed by knowledge, empathy, and an unwavering sense of duty. I approached this responsibility with seriousness and constant reflection, understanding that each policy could affect lives in ways both immediate and lasting. The weight of history was never far from my mind. I thought often of those who had held the office before me, the triumphs and failures that had shaped the nation. I understood that my tenure would be judged not merely by contemporary standards, but by the enduring consequences of my decisions. This perspective reinforced my commitment to principled governance, for it was not enough to act in accordance with the desires of the moment. I needed to act in a way that future generations could recognize as honest, fair, and steadfast. International matters, too, required careful attention. Trade, diplomacy, and national security were matters that could not be postponed or treated lightly. I convened my advisors, reviewed treaties and agreements, and deliberated with care over every engagement. I approached these challenges with the same clarity and prudence that had guided my domestic policies. Seek solutions that serve the nation's interests without compromising principle, and never allow expedience to override ethical or legal standards. Throughout these early months, I also paid close attention to the morale and cohesion of the administration. A president cannot act alone. The effectiveness of government depends on the dedication, competence, and integrity of those around him. I worked to ensure that cabinet members and key officials were aligned with the core values of honesty and public service, fostering an environment where constructive debate was welcomed, but unethical influence was not tolerated. It was a delicate balance, yet essential to preserving the integrity of the office. In these formative days, I often reflected on the journey that had brought me to this pinnacle. From humble beginnings, through years of local and state service, to the governorship of New York, each experience had prepared me for the enormity of the presidency. And yet, preparation alone was not enough. Leadership demanded constant vigilance, adaptability, and unwavering commitment to principle. I resolved that every action I took, every policy I implemented, and every decision I made would honor the trust of the people who had placed their faith in me. As the months unfolded, the practical realities of the presidency became increasingly vivid. Each day presented a complex array of challenges: legislation to review, departments to oversee, correspondence to respond to, and citizens' concerns to address. The scale was staggering, yet it also reinforced a simple truth I had learned early in my public life. Leadership is about service, not prestige. Each decision I made had the potential to affect countless lives, and with that awareness came both humility and determination that a significant portion of my attention focused on fiscal responsibility and economic policy. Balancing the federal budget, ensuring proper collection of revenues, and overseeing expenditures demanded careful analysis. I consulted with experts, examined historical records, and weighed the potential impact of each policy on the nation's well-being. The office required not only understanding of numbers, but judgment, patience, and foresight. I approached these duties with methodical care, knowing that mismanagement could undermine public trust and have long-term consequences. Simultaneously, I confronted issues of civil service and administrative reform. Entrenched systems of patronage had long undermined the effectiveness of government. I worked tirelessly to strengthen oversight, implement merit-based appointments, and establish mechanisms that would ensure accountability in every branch of administration. This work was often tedious and sometimes met with resistance, yet it was essential for the integrity of governance. I knew that citizens deserved a government that was competent, impartial, and committed to the public good, and I dedicated myself to achieving that standard. Foreign policy, too, demanded careful attention. The world was not static, and international relationships required diplomacy, prudence, and sometimes difficult compromise. I reviewed treaties, negotiated with foreign representatives, and deliberated over sensitive matters that could affect national security and trade. Every choice carried weight, as misjudgment could lead to conflict or undermine America's standing abroad. I relied on the counsel of experts, yet the final responsibility rested with me, and I accepted that burden with seriousness and care. Throughout all of these responsibilities, I remained mindful of the human element of governance. Policies are not abstract. They affect real people with real needs. I visited local communities, spoke with citizens, and encouraged open channels of communication. Whether addressing farmers concerned about tariffs or industrial workers seeking fair labor practices, I sought to understand the practical impact of government decisions. This connection to ordinary lives grounded my work and reminded me of why I had pursued public service from the beginning. The office also tested my resilience. Public scrutiny was relentless, and even minor actions could be exaggerated or misinterpreted. Critics were vocal, and opposition often took forms I had never encountered at the state level. Yet, I drew on the experience of past service, times when I had faced criticism, pressure, and misunderstanding, and reminded myself that integrity must never be sacrificed for comfort or approval. Leadership demands steadiness of character, and I strove to meet that standard every day. One of the most demanding aspects of the presidency was balancing the competing needs and opinions within my own administration. Cabinet members and advisors often disagreed on priorities, policies, and strategy. I encouraged debate and valued differing perspectives, but I also insisted on decisions guided by principle, fairness, and the public interest. The art of leadership, I realized, is not simply in making decisions, but in fostering an environment where integrity and competence prevail over personal ambition or partisan gain. In quiet moments, I reflected on the trajectory of my life. From my early career in Buffalo to the governorship of New York and now the presidency, each stage had imparted lessons in diligence, honesty, and the exercise of sound judgment. I recognize that the office itself is temporary, but the influence of principled leadership endures. It is measured not in applause or accolades, but in the trust and confidence of the people and the enduring strength of the institutions one serves. As time passed, the nation began to respond positively to the efforts of the administration. Reforms in civil service, prudent fiscal management, and attention to citizens' needs gradually reinforced public confidence. I remained vigilant, understanding that progress is often fragile and that each action must uphold the principles upon which trust is built. I approached my daily duties with both humility and resolve, knowing that the presidency is a position of service, and service demands consistent, ethical action. By the end of this period, I had come to fully understand the enormity of the office. The presidency is not merely a political position, but a moral and practical responsibility. Each decision, each policy, each interaction with citizens and officials alike carries weight. I resolved to meet these challenges with the same integrity, diligence, and steadfast commitment that had guided me through every previous stage of public life. Leadership, I understood, is defined not by ambition, but by the willingness to act rightly, to serve faithfully, and to uphold the trust placed in one by the people of the nation. By the time the second year of my presidency arrived, the office had become both familiar and increasingly demanding. The sheer volume of responsibilities required careful organization and an unflinching commitment to principle. Each morning brought new reports, requests, and challenges from across the nation. Some issues were urgent, demanding immediate attention, while others required careful deliberation. In all cases, I reminded myself that the measure of leadership is not speed, but integrity and thoroughness. A central focus during this period was the economy. Trade policies, tariffs, and the management of federal resources had immediate consequences for citizens in every state. Farmers in the Midwest depended on fair pricing for their crops, while manufacturers in the East needed stability to sustain growth and employment. I sought to balance these competing interests thoughtfully, relying on careful analysis and advice from experts. Yet even as I considered technical details, I never lost sight of the broader principle. The government exists to serve the people, not private or sectional interests. Each decision was approached with that standard as my guiding light. Civil service reform remained a priority. I had long recognized that patronage and favoritism undermined public confidence and efficiency. I worked tirelessly to strengthen merit-based appointments and to ensure that federal offices were staffed by competent and ethical individuals. Resistance occasionally arose, as entrenched interests sought to maintain influence. I met such challenges with calm persistence, knowing that the long-term health of government depended on establishing practices that would endure beyond any one administration. Reforms were painstaking, often slow, yet their benefits were unmistakable. The machinery of government began to function with greater fairness and effectiveness. International affairs demanded equal attention. Diplomatic negotiations, trade agreements, and relations with foreign powers required careful navigation. Each action could affect national security, economic stability, or the nation's reputation abroad. I convened advisors and consulted carefully, always mindful that every decision must reflect both prudence and principle. National leadership requires an understanding of both domestic priorities and international dynamics. A president cannot act in isolation or ignore the broader consequences of policy. I took this responsibility seriously, weighing each option and its potential impact with meticulous care. Daily correspondence with citizens reinforced the moral dimension of the presidency. Letters arrived from every corner of the nation, expressing hope, concern, and sometimes frustration. I read each one attentively, considering how policies and actions might improve the lives of ordinary Americans. These communications reminded me constantly that governance is not an abstraction. It is the careful balancing of human needs, aspirations, and rights. Listening to these voices provided both guidance and inspiration, and I endeavored to ensure that every decision honored the trust placed in me by the people. public appearances continued to be an important component of leadership. Speaking to citizens directly allowed me to convey principles, explain policy, and demonstrate transparency. Yet I was careful to speak with honesty and clarity, avoiding exaggeration or political posturing. Trust, I understood, is fragile and easily broken by empty promises or misleading statements. Therefore, I sought always to be forthright, to act in accordance with principle, and to exemplify the ethical standards I believed should guide every public servant. Internally, managing the administration required constant vigilance. Cabinet members and advisors often held differing views on policy and strategy. I encouraged robust discussion and debate, understanding that differing perspectives strengthen decisions when handled with respect and clarity. However, I insisted that actions taken by the government be guided by principle and public service, not personal ambition or factional gain. Leadership, I had learned, is measured not by popularity or appeasement, but by the ability to act rightly, even when doing so invites criticism or opposition. Throughout this period, I reflected often on the weight of history. The office I held was temporary, yet its influence extended far beyond my tenure. Decisions made in the present could affect future generations in ways that were impossible to fully predict. This awareness reinforced my commitment to integrity and deliberate action. Leadership is not measured by momentary applause, but by the enduring impact of decisions made in the service of justice, fairness, and the public good. Despite the immense responsibilities, moments of reflection and quiet thought remained essential. Walking through the executive offices late in the evening, reviewing the day's correspondence, or simply contemplating the scope of the nation's needs, I found clarity and renewed determination. The presidency is as much a test of character as it is of intellect or management skill. Every choice, every policy, every public statement is a reflection of the values and principles a leader brings to the office. I resolved to ensure that my legacy would be defined not by personal ambition, but by steadfast commitment to duty and integrity. As the year progressed, it became increasingly clear that effective governance requires balance between urgency and deliberation, between public opinion and principle, between domestic needs and international considerations. The lessons I had learned throughout my life, honesty, diligence, fairness, and reflection, proved invaluable. With each decision, each challenge, and each success or setback, I sought to remain true to those principles, understanding that the trust of the nation is both precious and fragile. As the second section of my presidency unfolded, the responsibilities of the office weighed more heavily than ever. Each day presented a new array of challenges, legislative matters requiring careful scrutiny, appointments demanding ethical consideration, and pressing issues that affected citizens' daily lives. The scope was staggering, yet it also affirmed the purpose for which I had dedicated my life to public service. Leadership, I reminded myself constantly, is measured by the ability to act justly and wisely in the service of the people, not by applause or recognition. One of the most demanding aspects during this period was reconciling competing priorities across the nation. Farmers needed support against market fluctuations. Industrial laborers sought fair wages and working conditions. Emerging businesses required stability to thrive. I engaged deeply with advisors, studied reports, and consulted with stakeholders to devise policies that would provide practical solutions while remaining grounded in principle. Every decision required careful deliberation, as even small misjudgments could ripple across the economy and society. Civil service and government reform continued to occupy a significant portion of my attention. Patronage and favoritism had long undermined efficiency, fairness, and public trust. I implemented systems to ensure merit-based appointments, reinforced accountability mechanisms, and promoted transparency at every level of the federal administration. Resistance was inevitable. Entrenched interests often sought to maintain influence. Yet I remained resolute, knowing that the long-term credibility of government depended on consistent, ethical action. Gradually, these reforms began to strengthen the functionality and reliability of the executive branch. Foreign affairs demanded meticulous care and judgment. Negotiations, treaties, and international trade issues required balancing national interests with global considerations. Each decision carried consequences for commerce, security, and diplomatic relationships. I convened my advisors regularly, weighing diverse perspectives while maintaining a focus on ethical and strategic prudence. In these matters, as in domestic affairs, leadership demanded thoughtful deliberation, foresight, and the courage to act rightly even when the path was difficult or contentious. Public communication remained central to leadership. I met with citizens, delivered speeches, and encouraged correspondents to understand the hopes, concerns, and expectations of the people. Listening attentively to these voices was as important as setting policy. Every citizen, from rural communities to urban centers, contributed insight that guided decision-making. The presidency, I understood, is not simply about authority. It is about responsiveness, empathy, and maintaining trust through transparency and honesty. Internally, managing the administration required a delicate balance. Cabinet members and advisors often held differing views, and reconciling these perspectives was critical to effective governance. I encouraged respectful debate, weighing each argument carefully, yet insisted that all actions remain aligned with public service and principle. Leadership is not about satisfying every opinion or accommodating ambition. It is about ensuring that government operates with integrity and in service to the common good. Challenges inevitably arose. Opposition was vocal, mistakes were magnified, and public scrutiny was constant. Yet each obstacle reinforced the need for patience, reflection, and moral steadiness. I drew on experiences from my early career, from local governance to the governorship, recognizing that steadfastness and adherence to principle would guide me through difficult moments. Every challenge was an opportunity to demonstrate that a life of honesty and service could meet the highest demands of public office. Throughout these months, I remained acutely aware of the historical significance of my actions. The presidency is temporary, but the decisions made within its confines can influence generations. Policies, reforms, and even the tone of leadership contribute to the nation's enduring character. This awareness instilled in me a profound sense of responsibility, reminding me that public trust is earned through consistent, ethical action and cannot be taken for granted. Even in the midst of constant activity, I sought moments of reflection and contemplation. Walking through the executive offices late at night, reviewing correspondence, or simply observing the rhythm of the nation, I found clarity and focus. The presidency is not a position of comfort. It is a test of character. Every decision, every interaction, and every policy reflects the values and principles of leadership. I was determined that mine would be guided by fairness, diligence, and unwavering integrity. By the conclusion of this period, the administration had achieved meaningful progress in governance, reform, and public engagement. Yet I knew the work was ongoing, and the presidency would continue to demand every ounce of attention, judgment, and moral courage. I resolved to continue acting with steadfast dedication, honoring the trust placed in me by the people, and ensuring that every step forward reflected the enduring values of service, honesty, and principled leadership. Entering the later stages of my presidency, I became increasingly conscious of the enduring responsibilities that come with the office. Leadership at the national level requires constant vigilance, balancing immediate needs with long-term stability and addressing diverse concerns while remaining faithful to principle. Each morning, I reviewed reports from every corner of the government, legislative updates, departmental audits, correspondence from citizens, and advisories on foreign affairs. The sheer volume of information was staggering, yet it reinforced the need for diligence, discernment, and patience. One of my principal focuses during this period remained economic stability. Policies affecting trade, tariffs, and federal revenue had consequences that extended to every state, city, and township. I paid particular attention to the challenges faced by farmers, laborers, and emerging industries, seeking solutions that would promote fairness, growth, and sustainable prosperity. Every decision required careful deliberation and consultation with experts, as even minor missteps could reverberate widely, affecting the livelihood and trust of countless citizens. Civil service reform continued to occupy my thoughts and actions. Establishing fair, merit-based practices was essential to ensure the integrity and effectiveness of government operations. Patronage had long undermined efficiency, and correcting it was neither simple nor immediately popular. I worked diligently to implement reforms, strengthen oversight, and ensure accountability. Each success reinforced my conviction that a competent, impartial administration is the foundation of public trust and national stability. Diplomatic affairs and international relations demanded equal attention. Trade agreements, treaties, and foreign policy decisions required careful navigation. Each choice had potential consequences for commerce, security, and international standing. I approached these matters with the same principles I applied to domestic policy: prudence, integrity, and consideration of the broader impact on the nation. Leadership, I realized, requires balancing competing priorities without sacrificing the core values that define honorable governance. Maintaining communication with citizens remained essential. Letters, petitions, and in-person discussions offered insight into the public's needs and perspectives. Understanding these voices informed policy decisions and grounded my approach in practical reality. Government must not operate in abstraction. It must respond to the lived experiences and concerns of the people it serves. I listened attentively, recognizing that the legitimacy of leadership rests on responsiveness, transparency, and consistency. The internal management of the administration also demanded careful attention. Cabinet members and advisors often had differing opinions on policy, strategy, and priorities. I encouraged open debate, believing that constructive discourse strengthens decisions. Yet I insisted that actions reflect principle and the public interest rather than personal or partisan advantage. Leadership, I knew, is tested not in moments of agreement, but in the ability to act rightly amidst disagreement and pressure. Challenges were constant. Criticism, opposition, and public scrutiny never ceased. Yet each challenge provided an opportunity to demonstrate steadfastness, patience, and moral clarity. Past experiences, serving as governor, mayor, and in other public roles, had prepared me to withstand pressure and act with integrity. I reminded myself that leadership is defined not by popularity, but by the willingness to make difficult decisions guided by principle and the public good. Reflection was vital amid the pressures of office. Late-night walks through the executive offices, quiet contemplation, and careful review of correspondence allowed me to maintain perspective. The presidency tests not only intellect or administrative skill, but character. Each policy, decision, and interaction is an opportunity to exemplify honesty, fairness, and commitment. I resolved that my tenure would be guided by these enduring values, ensuring that every action honored the trust placed in me by the nation. By this stage, I had developed a deeper understanding of governance as a moral as well as practical responsibility. Policy decisions, administrative reforms, and interactions with citizens are all part of a broader commitment to service. Leadership is sustained by integrity, diligence, and unwavering attention to the welfare of the people. As I continued my work, I sought to embody these principles consistently, ensuring that the nation's confidence in government was strengthened through honest, principled action. Through it all, I remained mindful that the office of the presidency is temporary, but the impact of principled leadership is enduring. Decisions made in this period could influence the nation's course for years, shaping institutions, trust, and public life. I approached each day with care, patience, and reflection, knowing that steadfast dedication and adherence to principle are the true markers of effective governance. As the second section of this chapter unfolded, the practical and ethical demands of the presidency became increasingly evident. No matter how familiar the office became, each day presented a series of complex decisions requiring thoughtful analysis, careful judgment, and steadfast adherence to principle. I often reminded myself that leadership is not measured by recognition or applause, but by the capacity to act justly, to serve the public faithfully, and to preserve the integrity of governance. Domestic affairs continued to require sustained attention. The management of federal resources, oversight of public institutions, and monitoring of economic policies were ongoing responsibilities. Every choice carried implications for citizens across the nation, from rural farmers to urban industrial workers. I worked diligently to ensure that policies promoted fairness, stability, and opportunity, consulting with advisors and experts while remaining firmly grounded in ethical considerations. Effective governance, I recognized, is the balance of knowledge, empathy, and moral clarity. Civil service and administrative reform remained central to my efforts. Entrenched patronage threatened efficiency and eroded public trust. So I continued to strengthen systems of merit-based appointments and accountability. Implementing these reforms required patience, persistence, and often a steady hand to manage opposition. Yet the results justified the effort. Government began functioning with greater fairness, professionalism, and public confidence. These reforms exemplified my belief that effective leadership is demonstrated through concrete actions, not empty rhetoric. International matters also demanded careful oversight. Trade relations, diplomatic negotiations, and security considerations required foresight and prudence. Decisions made in these arenas could influence national prosperity, diplomatic standing, and even the safety of citizens. I approached these challenges deliberately, weighing counsel, evaluating risks, and ensuring that choices aligned with principle and national interest. Leadership, I understood, requires courage to act rightly even when facing uncertainty or criticism. Public engagement remained a priority. Citizens' correspondence, petitions, and personal accounts provided insight into the practical effects of policy. Listening attentively helped shape decisions, keeping governance connected to the realities of ordinary life. I recognize that the presidency is not simply a position of authority. It is a commitment to responsiveness, empathy, and accountability. Every decision must honor the trust placed by the people, reflecting their needs and safeguarding their interests. Managing the internal workings of the administration required both diplomacy and firmness. Cabinet members and advisors often held divergent views, and reconciling these differences demanded careful leadership. I encouraged debate while maintaining clear ethical standards, ensuring that policy outcomes were guided by principle rather than personal gain or political expedience. The effectiveness of government, I believed, rests on the integrity and dedication of those who implement its policies. The public scrutiny inherent to the presidency was relentless. Every action, statement, and decision was observed, critiqued, and sometimes misinterpreted. Yet I found that challenges and opposition provided opportunities to demonstrate patience, resilience, and steadfastness. Past experiences in local and state office had prepared me to withstand scrutiny while remaining committed to principle. True leadership, I realized, is defined not by popularity, but by the courage to act ethically, fairly, and consistently, even under pressure. Periods of reflection were essential to maintaining clarity and focus. Quiet moments, whether reviewing correspondence late at night or walking alone through the executive offices, offered perspective on the responsibilities of office. The presidency is as much a test of character as it is of intellect or administrative skill. Every policy, interaction, and decision is a reflection of values and principles. I resolved to ensure that my actions consistently reflected integrity, fairness, and commitment to public service. As the months passed, the administration saw measurable progress in governance, reform, and public confidence. Policies aimed at fairness, efficiency, and accountability strengthened institutions and reassured citizens that government could act with integrity. Yet I recognize that progress must be sustained, and that the presidency requires constant attention, diligence, and moral clarity. Leadership is not a static achievement. It is an ongoing practice of ethical decision-making, public service, and principled governance. By the end of this period, I understood fully that the presidency is not an office of personal reward, but a solemn trust. Every action, policy, and interaction carries weight, affecting lives, institutions, and the nation's future. I remain committed to navigating these responsibilities with integrity, diligence, and steadfast adherence to principle, ensuring that the public trust was honored and that the nation could continue to thrive under governance guided by fairness, prudence, and service. As my presidency progressed into its later stages, I became increasingly aware that the culmination of years of service required both reflection and action. The office demanded constant vigilance, demanding decisions that could influence the nation for generations. Each morning, I reviewed reports from the departments, correspondence from citizens, and advisories on domestic and foreign matters. The magnitude of responsibility reinforced my commitment to principle, reminding me that leadership is measured not by recognition, but by the ability to serve justly and wisely. Domestic affairs continued to command substantial attention. Issues ranging from fiscal policy to infrastructure development, labor conditions, and regional economic disparities required thoughtful consideration. Each decision had tangible effects on citizens' lives. Farmers, industrial workers, and small business owners all depended on policies that balanced fairness with opportunity. I relied on careful analysis, consultation with experts, and importantly, my own judgment, shaped by decades of public service. No action could be taken lightly, for every choice carried weight far beyond its immediate context. Civil service and government efficiency remained central concerns. Patronage had long undermined the integrity of public administration, and reform was a slow, deliberate process. I continued to implement merit-based practices, strengthen oversight, and promote accountability at every level of government. Resistance and political friction were inevitable, yet perseverance was essential. I recognized that the long-term credibility of government depended on the establishment of systems that would endure beyond any single administration. Ensuring fairness, competence, and transparency was not merely a policy goal, it was a moral imperative. International relations also demanded careful attention. Trade, diplomacy, and national security issues required prudent judgment and strategic foresight. Every engagement with foreign powers carried potential consequences for commerce, security, and America's global standing. I approached these responsibilities methodically, weighing counsel and analyzing risks, always guided by principle and the nation's long-term interests. Effective leadership requires understanding that decisions made in the present can echo across decades, influencing the nation far beyond the immediate moment. Communication with citizens remained a cornerstone of governance. Letters, petitions, and in-person accounts revealed the real-world impact of policies and illuminated areas where improvement was needed. Listening attentively to these voices reminded me that government must remain connected to the people it serves. Leadership is not solely about authority or policy. It is about responsiveness, empathy, and accountability. Every action must honor the trust placed in the office and reflect a commitment to fairness and justice. Managing the administration required constant balance. Cabinet members and advisors often held divergent perspectives, and reconciling these differences was essential to effective governance. I encouraged debate and valued expertise, yet I insisted that decisions align with principle and public service rather than personal ambition or political convenience. Leadership is tested in moments of disagreement and pressure, and the ability to act rightly under such circumstances defines the true measure of office. Public scrutiny was unceasing. Every statement, decision, and policy choice was observed, debated, and sometimes criticized. Yet I found that such challenges reinforced the importance of patience, resilience, and moral steadiness. Past experiences in local and state governance had prepared me for scrutiny, reminding me that leadership is ultimately about integrity and commitment to the public good, not momentary approval or applause. Reflection and contemplation became vital amidst the demands of office. Late-night walks through the executive offices, reviewing correspondence, or simply observing the rhythm of the nation allowed me to maintain perspective. The presidency tests character as much as intellect or administrative skill. Every action, every policy, every interaction is a reflection of values and principles. I resolved to ensure that mine consistently embodied fairness, honesty, and unwavering dedication to the people I serve. By this stage, I fully understood that the presidency is as much a moral endeavor as a practical one. Decisions, policies, and reforms not only shape the present, but set precedents for the future. I approached each day with diligence, thoughtfulness, and a commitment to ethical leadership. Leadership is an ongoing practice, defined not by personal ambition, but by persistent adherence to principle, service, and responsibility. The months passed, and progress became evident. Administrative reforms strengthened government operations, policy initiatives promoted fairness and opportunity, and the public's trust gradually increased. Yet I remained vigilant, recognizing that the responsibilities of office are continuous and unrelenting. The presidency demands every measure of patience, judgment, and ethical discernment, and I resolved to continue guiding the nation with integrity and steadfast dedication. As I moved through the latter portion of my presidency, I became ever more aware of the cumulative weight of responsibility the office carried. Each day presented complex challenges, policy decisions affecting millions, administrative reforms with lasting impact, and diplomatic considerations that shape the nation's standing abroad. I recognize that leadership is defined not by temporary approval or personal ambition, but by the consistency of ethical action and steadfast commitment to the public good. Managing domestic policy required careful attention to both detail and principle. Economic matters, from tariffs to federal expenditures, demanded thoughtful analysis. I sought to ensure that policies promoted equity, encouraged growth, and protected the welfare of citizens in every region of the country. Farmers, industrial workers, and small business owners each relied on sound governance, and I approached every decision mindful of the practical implications for their lives. I drew upon experience, counsel, and moral judgment to navigate the complexities of these issues. Civil service reform and administrative oversight remained central to my agenda. Patronage had long eroded efficiency, fairness, and public trust. Implementing merit-based practices and strengthening accountability mechanisms was essential, though it often required perseverance and patience in the face of resistance. I understood that lasting institutional integrity depends on consistent ethical governance. The work was slow and painstaking, yet the improvements reinforced my belief that principled leadership yields enduring results. International matters continued to demand vigilance. Negotiating trade, addressing foreign policy challenges, and maintaining national security required prudence, foresight, and balance. Every decision had potential repercussions, and I approached each with careful deliberation, informed by the counsel of experts and guided by principle. Leadership requires courage to act rightly even when the outcome is uncertain and the stakes are high. Decisions made in the present would echo into the future, influencing the nation and its role in the world for decades. Public engagement remained a cornerstone of effective governance. I listened to letters, petitions, and personal accounts from citizens across the nation. Understanding their needs and perspectives informed policy and provided accountability. Government is not an abstract institution. It is a network of decisions affecting human lives. Remaining connected to those lives grounded my leadership and reminded me that the presidency is a service, not a privilege. Internally, managing the administration required balancing differing perspectives among advisors and cabinet members. I encouraged debate, valued expertise, and deliberated carefully, but I insisted that actions align with ethical standards and the public interest. Leadership is most rigorously tested in moments of disagreement, when the pressure is high and decisions carry weighty consequences. Acting with integrity in such times defines the true measure of office. Public scrutiny was relentless. Every policy, statement, and action was examined, criticized, or debated. Yet I found that these challenges reinforced the importance of resilience, patience, and moral clarity. Past experiences, from local office to state leadership, had prepared me to withstand scrutiny while remaining committed to principle. Leadership is not about popularity, but about making decisions rooted in fairness, honesty, and a sense of enduring responsibility. Reflection and contemplation were essential amid the pressures of governance. Quiet moments, whether reviewing correspondence late at night or walking through the halls of office, allowed perspective and focus to return. The presidency tests not only intellect and management skill, but character. Every interaction, decision, and policy reflects values and principles. I sought to ensure that mine consistently demonstrated integrity, fairness, and dedication to the people. As this period of my presidency came to a close, I observed tangible outcomes of sustained, principled leadership. Administrative reforms enhanced efficiency and public trust. Economic policies balanced fairness with growth. Diplomatic efforts maintained stability and respect abroad. Yet I remained vigilant, understanding that governance requires unrelenting attention, ethical discernment, and a steady hand. Leadership is a continuous practice, defined by service, integrity, and dedication to the nation's welfare. By the conclusion of this chapter, I had a renewed understanding of the office's demands. The presidency is both a privilege and a solemn trust. Every choice carries consequence, and the measure of leadership is the extent to which those choices serve the public good. I resolved to continue acting with steadfast commitment, ensuring that every action honored the trust placed in me, reinforced public confidence, and exemplified principled governance for future generations. As I entered the final stages of my presidency, The weight of experience and responsibility pressed ever more keenly upon me. Each day demanded careful thought, deliberate action, and unwavering adherence to principle. The office had become familiar, yet no familiarity diminished the gravity of decisions affecting the nation and its citizens. Morning reports, correspondence from across the states, and advisories on both domestic and international matters consumed my attention, reminding me that the presidency is an unrelenting call to service. Domestic affairs remained a constant focus. Economic policies, ranging from federal expenditures to tariff regulations, required careful consideration to balance regional needs, promote growth, and safeguard public welfare. I analyzed reports, sought expert counsel, and reflected on prior experience to make decisions that would have meaningful impact. Farmers, industrial workers, and emerging businesses alike depended upon policies that were fair, sustainable, and principled. Leadership, I reminded myself, is measured by the positive effects of decisions on the lives of ordinary citizens, not by temporary acclaim or applause. Civil service reform and administrative efficiency continued to occupy much of my attention. Entrenched patronage had long weakened the effectiveness and credibility of government. I remained committed to implementing merit-based appointments, strengthening oversight, and promoting transparency. Resistance was natural, and the path forward was slow, yet I recognized that enduring institutional integrity required steadfast effort. Every step toward accountability and competence reinforced public trust and demonstrated that principled governance yields lasting results. International relations demanded continual vigilance. Diplomatic negotiations, trade agreements, and matters of national security required careful analysis, strategic thinking, and moral clarity. Every decision carried potential consequences for commerce, stability, and America's position in the world. I approached these responsibilities with deliberation, ensuring that principle guided every choice. Leadership requires courage to act rightly even when circumstances are uncertain or opposition is strong, and I sought to uphold that standard in every engagement. Public engagement remained critical. Letters, petitions, and interactions with citizens provided insight into the real-world impact of policy. Listening to these voices grounded my decisions in practical reality and ensured government remained responsive to the people it served. Leadership is not only about authority, but also about empathy, accountability, and sustaining public confidence through consistent, principled action. Managing the internal workings of the administration required both diplomacy and firmness. Cabinet members and advisors often held differing views, and reconciling these perspectives was essential. I encouraged discussion and valued expertise while maintaining clear ethical standards. Decisions had to reflect principle and the public interest, rather than personal gain or partisan advantage. True leadership, I had learned, is revealed in moments when competing pressures test integrity and judgment. Public scrutiny was ever present. Each policy, statement, and action was observed, debated, and sometimes criticized. Yet these challenges reinforced the importance of patience, resilience, and moral steadfastness. Past experiences had prepared me to withstand scrutiny, emphasizing that leadership is defined by ethical consistency and service to the nation, rather than fleeting approval or acclaim. Reflection and contemplation were indispensable. Quiet moments, reviewing correspondence late at night or walking through the offices, allowed me to maintain clarity and perspective. The presidency is a test of character as much as intellect. Every decision, every action, every interaction reflects the values and principles a leader brings to office. I committed to ensuring that mine consistently embodied integrity, diligence, and dedication to public service. As the months progressed, the fruits of principled leadership became evident. Administrative reforms enhanced efficiency and public confidence. Economic measures balanced opportunity with fairness. Diplomatic initiatives maintained stability abroad. Yet vigilance remained essential. Governance is continuous, demanding unwavering attention, ethical discernment, and steadfast dedication. Leadership is a practice, not a static achievement, defined by sustained service and adherence to principle. By the end of this first section, I was reminded that the presidency, while temporary, carries lasting influence. Every choice, every policy, every action shapes institutions, impacts lives, and sets precedents for future generations. I resolved to continue guiding the nation with integrity, ensuring that my tenure reinforced trust in government, demonstrated principled leadership, and served the best interests of the American people. As I moved into the final phase of my presidency, the responsibility of office weighed with an ever-deepening gravity. Every day brought decisions that affected millions, from domestic economic policy to administrative reforms and international diplomacy. The office is not merely ceremonial. It demands diligence, moral clarity, and steadfast commitment. Leadership is measured not by fleeting recognition, but by the tangible impact of decisions on the nation and its people. Domestic governance continued to require meticulous attention. Economic policies, public expenditures, and regional concerns all demanded careful deliberation. I considered the needs of farmers, laborers, and businesses alike, seeking to implement measures that were equitable and sustainable. Consulting with experts and reviewing historical precedent guided my choices. Yet ultimately, judgment rested on principle and a deep sense of responsibility. Every policy had consequences, and every decision required careful thought and ethical discernment. Civil service reform and governmental efficiency remained at the forefront of my efforts. Patronage had long eroded the effectiveness of public institutions, and establishing merit-based practices was essential. Implementing oversight mechanisms and promoting transparency faced resistance, yet I persevered, knowing that enduring trust in government depended on these reforms. The work was incremental, but the results were undeniable. Improved efficiency, strengthened public confidence, and a government better equipped to serve the people. International relations demanded constant vigilance and careful diplomacy. Trade negotiations, treaties, and security matters required strategic foresight and ethical consistency. Each decision could have lasting effects on national prosperity, security, and America's international standing. I approached these responsibilities methodically, weighing counsel, analyzing potential consequences, and ensuring that principle guided every course of action. Leadership requires courage to act rightly, even when uncertainty looms or opposition is strong. Maintaining direct engagement with citizens was crucial. Letters, petitions, and conversations provided insight into the practical consequences of policy decisions. Government is most effective when it is responsive, empathetic, and grounded in the realities of those it serves. Listening to these voices reinforced the moral foundation of leadership. Every decision is a responsibility to the people, and every action must honor their trust. Managing the administration required constant balance. Cabinet members and advisors often had divergent perspectives, and reconciling these differences was essential. I encouraged debate and valued expertise while maintaining a clear commitment to ethical governance. Decisions needed to reflect principle and the public interest, not personal or partisan ambition. Leadership is most rigorously tested when pressure is high and consensus is difficult, and navigating these moments defines the character of an administration. Public scrutiny was unceasing, yet it provided opportunities to demonstrate steadiness, patience, and moral clarity. Past experiences in governance, both local and state, had prepared me to handle criticism while remaining guided by principle. Leadership is not about appeasing all opinions, but about acting with integrity, fairness, and unwavering dedication to public service. Reflection remained an essential practice. Quiet moments in the evening, reviewing correspondence, or walking through the halls of office allowed perspective and focus to return. The presidency is a test of character as much as intellect. Every action, policy, and interaction reflects the values and principles a leader brings to the office. I resolved to ensure that mine consistently exemplified honesty, diligence, and steadfast commitment to the welfare of the nation. As this chapter drew to a close, I observed the tangible outcomes of principled governance. Administrative reforms enhanced effectiveness and transparency. Economic policies sought to balance fairness with growth. Diplomacy maintained the nation's standing abroad. Yet I remained vigilant, understanding that leadership is continuous, requiring constant attention, ethical discernment, and unwavering dedication. By the end of this period, I fully appreciated that the presidency is both a privilege and a solemn trust. Each decision shapes the nation's institutions, affects the lives of its citizens, and sets precedents for future generations. I resolved to guide every action with integrity, ensuring that the office was a force for good, that public confidence was strengthened, and that the enduring principles of principled leadership were upheld for the benefit of the American people. As I entered the final chapters of my time in office, I reflected often on the journey that had brought me here. The presidency is a constant test of judgment, patience, and moral steadfastness. Each day brought a torrent of responsibilities, policy decisions, administrative oversight, diplomatic negotiations, and correspondence from citizens eager for guidance or assistance. The weight of these duties was immense, yet it reminded me daily of the privilege and responsibility of leading a nation. Domestic policy remained a central concern. Economic decisions, including the management of federal resources, tariffs, and fiscal policy, had immediate and long-lasting consequences. I sought to balance competing interests, the needs of farmers with the demands of industry, the requirements of emerging urban centers with the welfare of rural communities. Careful analysis, consultations with experts, and measured reflection guided each decision. Yet I always grounded my judgments in principle and the broader aim of serving the people justly and effectively. Civil service reform continued to be a priority. The entrenched system of patronage had long undermined efficiency and public confidence in government. I worked tirelessly to implement merit-based appointments, strengthen oversight, and cultivate a culture of integrity and accountability within the administration. These efforts were slow and met with resistance. Yet I was convinced that only through consistent, principled action could the public trust in government be restored and maintained. International affairs demanded equal attention. Diplomacy, trade agreements, and national security issues required careful navigation. Each decision carried potential consequences not only for the present, but for the nation's standing in the world for decades to come. I approached every situation with deliberate care, seeking advice, weighing risks, and ensuring that principle guided each choice. Leadership, I knew, requires the courage to act rightly, even when opposition is vocal or uncertainty looms. Engaging with citizens remained an essential aspect of governance. Letters, petitions, and personal appeals provided insight into the practical effects of policies and the challenges facing ordinary Americans. Listening to these voices reinforced the moral purpose of leadership. Government exists to serve the people, and every decision should reflect their needs, aspirations, and rights. This connection was a constant source of guidance and motivation, reminding me that the office is fundamentally about service. Internally, managing the administration required skill and patience. Cabinet members and advisors often held differing opinions, and reconciling these perspectives was essential to coherent governance. I encouraged open debate, considered every argument carefully, and ensured that all actions were guided by principle rather than personal ambition or political gain. Leadership is tested most rigorously in moments of disagreement and pressure, and how one responds defines both the administration and the office itself. Public scrutiny was ever present, yet it reinforced the importance of transparency, patience, and integrity. Past experience had taught me that criticism and opposition, while sometimes disheartening, were inevitable in a free society. Leadership is defined not by popularity, but by the capacity to act consistently with justice, honesty, and public responsibility. Every choice carried weight, and the consequences of ethical governance extend far beyond the term of any single administration. Reflection and contemplation were vital to sustaining focus. In quiet moments, whether reviewing correspondence late at night or walking through the halls of the executive offices, I found clarity and renewed determination. The presidency is a test not only of intellect and administrative skill, but of character. Every action, policy, and interaction reflects the values and principles a leader brings to the office. I resolved to ensure that mine consistently embodied integrity, diligence, and commitment to the public good. As this section of my presidency progressed, the results of principled leadership became increasingly apparent. Administrative reforms strengthened the functionality and credibility of government. Economic policies sought to balance growth with fairness. Diplomatic initiatives maintained stability and respect abroad. Yet I remained ever vigilant, recognizing that governance requires unceasing attention, ethical discernment, and steadfast commitment. By the conclusion of this first section, I was reminded that the presidency, while temporary, leaves enduring consequences. Every decision, policy, and action shapes institutions, influences lives, and establishes precedents for future generations. I remained resolved to act with integrity, to maintain public trust, and to guide the nation in a manner consistent with the enduring principles of honest and ethical leadership. As I moved deeper into the final stage of my presidency, I felt the weight of accumulated experience pressing upon me with clarity. The office, though familiar, continued to demand constant diligence, foresight, and moral fortitude. Each day presented a spectrum of responsibilities: administrative oversight, domestic policy decisions, international diplomacy, and the unending correspondence of citizens seeking guidance or reassurance. Leadership, I reminded myself constantly, is defined not by acclaim or public attention, but by the capacity to act with integrity, fairness, and principled judgment. Domestic affairs required precise attention to detail and principle. Economic policies, public expenditures, and legislative initiatives all carried consequences that affected the livelihoods of millions. Farmers, industrial workers, and small business owners depended on decisions grounded in fairness and prudence. I carefully weighed expert advice, historical precedent, and ethical considerations before committing to any course of action. Every decision, I understood, had the potential to leave a lasting imprint on the nation and its people. Civil service reform remained an ongoing priority. The long-standing system of patronage had eroded efficiency and public confidence, and establishing merit-based appointments was essential to ensure competent governance. I worked diligently to implement reforms, reinforce accountability, and promote transparency. While resistance was inevitable, persistence and principled action gradually yielded meaningful results, strengthening both the credibility of government and the trust of the citizenry. International relations continued to demand meticulous attention. Diplomatic negotiations, trade policies, and matters of national security required careful consideration and ethical clarity. Each decision carried consequences beyond the immediate, potentially shaping the nation's position on the world stage for decades. I approached these challenges thoughtfully, weighing risks and benefits while ensuring that every action aligned with principle and the broader interests of the nation. Leadership requires courage to act rightly, even when faced with uncertainty or opposition. Maintaining engagement with the public was vital. Letters, petitions, and conversations provided insight into the real effects of policies on the daily lives of citizens. Government must remain responsive and attentive, and I considered these communications a guide to informed and empathetic leadership. Each citizen's voice was a reminder that governance is ultimately about service, and that every action should honor the trust placed in the office. Managing the internal dynamics of the administration required continual effort. Cabinet members and advisors held diverse opinions, and reconciling these differences was essential for coherent governance. I encouraged debate, considered every viewpoint carefully, and ensured that final decisions reflected principle and the public interest rather than personal ambition or political expediency. True leadership reveals itself in the ability to navigate disagreement with integrity and fairness. Public scrutiny was ever-present and relentless. Each policy, decision, and statement was observed, interpreted, and frequently critiqued. Yet I viewed these challenges as opportunities to demonstrate steadfastness, resilience, and moral clarity. Past experiences in local and state governance had prepared me to withstand criticism while remaining focused on principled action. Leadership is tested not in moments of ease, but in circumstances that demand ethical fortitude and unwavering commitment to public service. Reflection and contemplation were essential tools in sustaining clarity of purpose. Quiet moments, reviewing correspondence late at night, or walking through the executive offices allowed me to maintain perspective and focus. The presidency tests character as much as intellect, and every decision reflects the values and principles that guide a leader. I resolved to ensure that my actions consistently demonstrated integrity, diligence, and dedication to the nation. As this final section of my presidency unfolded, I observed the tangible results of sustained, principled leadership. Administrative reforms improved efficiency and trust. Economic policies balanced fairness with opportunity. Diplomatic efforts maintained stability and respect abroad. Yet I remained aware that governance is unending work, requiring persistent attention ethical discernment, and steadfast dedication be why the end of this chapter. I fully appreciated that the presidency, though temporary, carries enduring influence. Every action, policy, and decision shapes institutions, affects countless lives, and sets examples for future generations. I remained committed to ensuring that my tenure honored public trust, reinforced the principles of ethical leadership, and left a lasting legacy of service, fairness, and integrity for the nation. As I approached the final period of my presidency, I felt the dual weight of accomplishment and responsibility. The office had taught me the complexities of governance, the delicate balance between principle and pragmatism, and the constant demands of public service. Every day brought new decisions, new challenges, and new opportunities to demonstrate ethical and effective leadership. From domestic policy to international affairs, no task could be taken lightly, for each choice held consequences reaching far beyond the immediate moment. Domestic governance demanded unceasing attention. Economic policies, including tariffs, federal expenditures, and programs affecting agriculture and industry, required thoughtful deliberation. Citizens from every corner of the nation relied upon decisions made with fairness and foresight. I carefully studied reports, consulted experts, and reflected on past experience, always striving to weigh competing interests and make choices that would foster equity and opportunity. Leadership, I reminded myself, is not defined by fleeting praise but by enduring impact on the lives of the people. Civil service reform remained an enduring priority. The system of patronage had long weakened public trust and administrative efficiency. I worked tirelessly to implement merit-based appointments, strengthen oversight, and ensure accountability within the government. Resistance was natural, but principled persistence gradually produced measurable improvements. Establishing a competent, transparent, and ethical government was essential not only to the present administration, but to the long-term credibility of the nation's institutions. International affairs required careful judgment and prudence. Diplomacy, trade, and national security demanded deliberate action, as choices in these areas could influence the nation's prosperity and reputation for years to come. I approached each situation with thoughtful analysis, weighing counsel and considering the broader implications of every decision. Leadership requires courage to act rightly even under pressure, and I sought to ensure that every action reflected principle and national interest. Engagement with the public was a vital part of governance. Letters, petitions, and personal accounts offered insight into the real-world effects of policy. Listening attentively allowed me to remain connected to the needs and perspectives of the citizens I served. Government is effective only when it responds to the people it represents, and this connection reminded me constantly that the presidency is an office of service, accountability, and ethical responsibility. Managing the internal dynamics of the administration required care and prudence. Cabinet members and advisors often held divergent views, and reconciling these perspectives was crucial to coherent governance. I encouraged discussion and considered every viewpoint while ensuring that final decisions adhered to principle and served the public interest. Leadership is tested most rigorously when navigating disagreement and pressure, and I learned that the integrity of decision-making defines both the office and the administration. Public scrutiny was unrelenting. Every statement, policy, and action was observed, analyzed, and frequently criticized. Yet these challenges reinforced the necessity of patience, perseverance, and moral clarity. Past experiences had prepared me to withstand opposition while maintaining principled leadership. True governance is defined not by temporary approval, but by steadfast dedication to justice, fairness, and the welfare of the nation. Reflection remained essential amid the demands of office. Quiet moments, whether reviewing correspondence late at night or walking through the executive halls, offered perspective and renewed focus. The presidency tests character as much as intellect or administrative skill. Every action, interaction, and policy decision reflects the values a leader embodies. I resolved to ensure mine consistently exemplified integrity, diligence, and a commitment to public service. As this section progressed, the tangible effects of principled leadership became increasingly clear. Administrative reforms enhanced efficiency and public confidence. Economic measures sought to balance opportunity with fairness, and diplomatic initiatives maintained stability and respect abroad. Yet I remain mindful that leadership requires ongoing vigilance, ethical discernment, and unyielding dedication. To be why the end of this first section, I was reminded that the presidency, though temporary, carries consequences that endure. Every decision shapes institutions, affects the lives of citizens, and sets precedents for future leaders. I remained committed to guiding the office with integrity, ensuring that my tenure strengthened public trust and demonstrated the enduring value of principled leadership. As I entered the final stretch of my presidency, the responsibility of office weighed heavily, yet with a sense of purpose and clarity. Each day brought the task of balancing domestic policy, administrative oversight, and international relations, all while remaining attentive to the concerns of the citizenry. Leadership, I reminded myself, is measured not by popularity or applause, but by the ethical consistency, diligence, and foresight brought to every decision. Domestic matters continued to demand careful, thoughtful attention. Economic policies, from federal budgets to tariffs and infrastructure investments, affected citizens across the nation. I considered the needs of farmers, industrial laborers, and small business owners alike, striving to implement solutions that promoted fairness, stability, and opportunity. Expert counsel, analysis of precedent, and reflection guided my decisions, yet ultimate judgment rested on principle and the enduring obligation to serve the public good. Civil service reform remained a cornerstone of governance. The entrenched system of patronage had long hindered efficiency and public confidence. I continued to implement merit-based appointments, enforce accountability, and promote transparency within the administration. Progress was gradual and resistance inevitable, yet persistence was crucial. I knew that strengthening the institutional foundations of government was essential to maintaining public trust and ensuring that the nation's institutions could endure beyond any single presidency. International relations demanded constant vigilance. Diplomacy, trade negotiations, and national security required strategic foresight, prudence, and moral clarity. Every decision could influence the nation's global standing and prosperity for decades. I approached these matters with deliberation, weighing counsel, evaluating risks, and ensuring that each action reflected principle and the long-term interests of the country. Leadership requires the courage to act rightly, even in the face of uncertainty or opposition, and I strove to uphold that standard consistently. Maintaining connection with the public was vital. Letters, petitions, and personal accounts from citizens offered insight into the practical effects of policy. Listening attentively ensured that governance remained responsive, empathetic, and grounded in reality. Leadership is not an abstract exercise of authority. It is a commitment to understanding and serving the people. Each decision must honor the trust placed in the office and reflect a dedication to justice, fairness, and the nation's well-being. Managing the internal dynamics of the administration remained a delicate task. Cabinet members and advisors frequently held diverse opinions, and reconciling these differences was essential to coherent policy. I encouraged debate, considered every viewpoint carefully, and ensured that final decisions adhered to principle and served the public interest rather than personal or political agendas. True leadership is revealed when navigating disagreement with integrity, patience, and clarity of purpose. Public scrutiny was relentless and inescapable. Every statement, policy, and action was analyzed and often debated. Yet such attention reinforced the need for patience, moral steadiness, and resilience. Leadership is defined not by fleeting popularity, but by the capacity to act consistently, ethically, and in service to the nation. I drew upon past experiences to maintain focus and clarity amidst criticism, remaining guided by principle at all times. Reflection and contemplation were indispensable. Quiet moments, whether reviewing correspondence late at night or walking through the offices, allowed perspective and renewed determination. The presidency is as much a test of character as of intellect or administrative skill. Every policy, interaction, and decision reflects the values and principles that guide a leader. I resolved to ensure that mine consistently demonstrated integrity, diligence, and commitment to public service. As this final section unfolded, the results of sustained, principled leadership were evident. Administrative reforms strengthened efficiency and trust. Economic policies balanced opportunity and fairness. Diplomatic initiatives maintained stability abroad. Yet I remain mindful that governance is an ongoing practice, demanding unceasing attention, ethical discernment, and steadfast dedication. By the conclusion of this chapter, I fully recognize that the presidency, though finite, leaves enduring consequences. Every choice, policy, and action shapes institutions, influences lives, and sets precedents for future leaders. I remained committed to acting with integrity, reinforcing public confidence, and ensuring that the office exemplified principled leadership, leaving a legacy of service, fairness, and ethical governance for generations to come. As I entered the final phase of my presidency, reflection became a constant companion. Years of public service had shaped my understanding of leadership, governance, and the profound responsibility inherent in the office. Each day demanded deliberate thought, careful decision-making, and a steadfast adherence to principle. From domestic policy to international diplomacy, the choices I made carried weight far beyond the immediate, affecting the lives of citizens and the legacy of the nation for years to come. Domestic affairs required unrelenting attention. Economic policies, infrastructure development, and federal expenditures impacted communities across the country. Farmers, industrial workers, and small business owners all depended on policies that were fair, balanced, and sustainable. I approached each decision with diligence, consulting experts, reviewing historical precedents, and carefully weighing consequences. Leadership, I recognized, is not measured by applause or recognition, but by the enduring benefits of principled action for the people. Civil service reform continued to be a central focus. The long-standing system of patronage had undermined efficiency and public confidence, and I sought to establish merit-based practices, strengthen oversight, and cultivate integrity within the administration. Resistance was inevitable, but persistent, principled effort gradually produced meaningful improvements. Ensuring the government functioned effectively, fairly, and transparently was not only essential to my administration, but critical to the enduring credibility of the nation's institutions. International relations demanded equal vigilance. Diplomacy, trade negotiations, and matters of national security required careful judgment, strategic foresight, and ethical consistency. Every decision could influence the nation's global standing and prosperity for decades. I approached each challenge methodically, weighing advice, evaluating risks, and ensuring that principle guided each course of action. Leadership requires the courage to act rightly, even in the face of opposition or uncertainty, and I sought to maintain that standard at every turn. Engaging with citizens remained vital. Letters, petitions, and first-hand accounts offered insight into the real effects of policy. Listening attentively ensured that governance remained responsive and grounded in the needs of the people. Leadership is ultimately a practice of service. Each decision must honor the trust placed in the office and reflect a commitment to justice, fairness, and the public good. Managing the internal workings of the administration required patience and discernment. Cabinet members and advisors often held divergent views, and reconciling these perspectives was essential for coherent governance. I encouraged open debate, carefully considered every argument, and ensured that final decisions adhered to principle and served the public interest rather than political or personal ambitions. Leadership is most rigorously tested in times of disagreement, and how one navigates such moments defines both the administration and the office itself. Public scrutiny was constant and sometimes intense. Every policy, statement, and action was observed and critiqued. Yet such attention reinforced the importance of perseverance, moral clarity, and resilience. Leadership is defined not by popularity, but by the consistent application of ethical judgment and service to the nation. I relied on past experience to maintain focus and resolve, ensuring that every action reflected principled decision-making. Reflection became an essential daily practice. Quiet moments, whether reviewing correspondence late at night or walking through the executive offices, offered perspective and clarity. The presidency is a test not only of intellect and administrative skill, but of character. Every interaction, policy, and choice reflects the values and principles a leader brings to the office. I resolved to ensure that mine consistently embodied integrity, diligence, and dedication to public service. As this section progressed, the tangible outcomes of principled leadership became increasingly apparent. Administrative reforms strengthened efficiency and public confidence. Economic policies promoted fairness and opportunity, and diplomatic initiatives reinforced stability abroad. Yet I remained vigilant, understanding that leadership requires continual attention, ethical discernment, and steadfast dedication to the public good. By the conclusion of this first section, I reflected on the enduring responsibility of the presidency. Every decision shapes institutions, influences lives, and establishes precedents for the future. I remained committed to guiding the office with integrity, ensuring that my tenure reinforced public trust and exemplified principled leadership for generations to come. As I approached the final months of my presidency, I felt the profound weight of both responsibility and opportunity. The office demanded unwavering attention, careful judgment, and a steadfast commitment to principle. Every day brought decisions that could influence the nation for decades, from domestic policies that shaped the economy and social welfare, to international affairs that affected America's standing in the world. Leadership, I understood, is measured not by acclaim or applause, but by the lasting impact of principled action. Domestic matters continued to occupy my attention with urgency. Economic policy, infrastructure projects, and legislation affecting farmers, workers, and businesses required careful deliberation. I reviewed reports, consulted advisors, and considered historical precedent, striving to make decisions that were fair, balanced, and sustainable. Each policy had tangible consequences on citizens' lives, and I approached every choice with diligence, moral clarity, and a deep sense of responsibility. Civil service reform and government efficiency remained priorities. The entrenched system of patronage had long undermined effectiveness and public confidence. I worked steadily to establish merit-based appointments, strengthen oversight, and cultivate integrity across all levels of administration. Resistance was natural, yet persistence and principled action gradually yielded meaningful progress. Ensuring a competent, transparent, and accountable government was essential not only for my administration, but for the long-term stability of the nation. International relations demanded careful judgment and foresight. Diplomacy, trade, and security matters required strategic consideration and ethical consistency. Each choice carried potential consequences for America's global reputation, prosperity, and security. I approached these challenges methodically, weighing counsel, assessing risks, and ensuring that every action was grounded in principle and long-term national interest. Leadership, I knew, requires courage to act rightly even in the face of uncertainty or opposition. Remaining connected to the public was vital. Letters, petitions, and personal accounts from citizens provided insight into the real-world effects of policy. Listening attentively allowed me to remain grounded, ensuring that government remained responsive and empathetic. Leadership is ultimately about service. Every decision should honor the trust placed in the office and reflect a commitment to fairness, justice, and the public good. Managing the internal dynamics of the administration continued to require patience and discernment. Cabinet members and advisors often held differing views, and reconciling these perspectives was essential for coherent and effective governance. I encouraged debate, carefully considered every viewpoint, and ensured that final decisions reflected principle and public interest rather than personal ambition or partisan politics. True leadership is revealed in the ability to navigate disagreement with integrity, clarity, and steadiness of purpose. Public scrutiny was constant and sometimes unrelenting. Every policy, action, and statement was examined, interpreted, and often critiqued. Yet such attention reinforced the importance of resilience, moral clarity, and ethical steadfastness. Leadership is not defined by temporary approval or public favor, but by the capacity to act consistently and ethically in service to the nation. Past experiences guided me in maintaining focus, balance, and a steady hand amid criticism and challenge. Reflection and contemplation were essential to sustain clarity of judgment. Quiet moments, reviewing correspondence, walking through the executive offices, or observing the rhythms of daily life in Washington provided perspective and renewed determination. The presidency tests character as much as intellect or administrative skill. Every policy, interaction, and decision reflects the principles a leader embodies. I resolved to ensure that mine consistently demonstrated integrity, diligence, and dedication to public service, As this final section progressed, the results of sustained, principled leadership became evident. Administrative reforms strengthened efficiency and credibility. Economic measures promoted fairness and growth. Diplomatic initiatives maintained stability and respect abroad. Yet I remain mindful that governance is ongoing work, demanding continuous attention, ethical discernment, and unwavering dedication. By the conclusion of Chapter 13, I fully appreciated that the presidency, though temporary, carries enduring consequences. Every decision, action, and policy shapes institutions, affects lives, and sets examples for future generations. I resolved to ensure that my tenure exemplified principled leadership, reinforced public trust, and left a legacy of service, fairness, and ethical governance for the nation. As I entered the final phase of my public career, I felt both a sense of accomplishment and an acute awareness of the enduring responsibility of leadership. The presidency had provided countless lessons in governance, judgment, and the weight of public trust. Every day brought decisions with consequences that stretched far into the future, decisions that shaped lives, guided institutions, and influenced the nation's moral and political trajectory. The work required unwavering attention, moral clarity, and an unflinching commitment to principle. Domestic governance remained a constant priority. Economic policies, including tariffs, federal budgets, and infrastructure projects, demanded careful analysis. Farmers, laborers, and business owners alike depended on policies that promoted fairness, stability, and opportunity. I reviewed reports, consulted advisors, and reflected on historical precedent, striving to balance competing interests. Leadership, I understood, is measured not by applause but by the enduring impact of principled decision-making on the lives of the people. Civil service reform continued to occupy my focus. The system of patronage had long hindered administrative efficiency and public trust. Implementing merit-based appointments, strengthening oversight, and promoting accountability were essential to creating a government capable of serving all citizens effectively. Resistance was expected, yet persistent. Principled action gradually strengthened institutions, reinforced public confidence, and cultivated a culture of integrity within the administration. International affairs demanded equal attention. Diplomacy, trade negotiations, and national security required careful judgment, foresight, and ethical consistency. Every decision had the potential to affect America's reputation, security, and prosperity for decades. I approached these challenges methodically, weighing counsel, analyzing risks, and ensuring that principle guided every course of action. Leadership requires the courage to act rightly, even amid opposition or uncertainty, and I sought to maintain this standard at all times. Engagement with the public was essential. Letters, petitions, and personal appeals provided insight into the real-world effects of policy decisions. Listening carefully allowed me to remain grounded in the practical concerns of citizens, ensuring that government remained responsive, empathetic, and effective. Leadership is fundamentally an act of service, and every choice must honor the trust placed in the office. Managing internal administrative dynamics demanded patience and discernment. Cabinet members and advisors often had differing perspectives, and reconciling these viewpoints was essential for coherent policy. I encouraged debate, weighed arguments thoughtfully, and ensured that final decisions reflected principle and the public interest rather than personal or political considerations. Leadership is most rigorously tested during disagreements, and the ability to navigate these moments with integrity defines both the administration and the office. Public scrutiny was unrelenting. Every policy, action, and statement was analyzed, debated, and critiqued. Yet such scrutiny reinforced the need for steadfastness, moral clarity, and resilience. Leadership is not determined by temporary popularity, but by consistent, principled action in service of the nation. Past experiences in governance guided me to maintain focus and perspective, ensuring that every decision reflected ethical judgment and long-term responsibility. Reflection was essential to maintain clarity and resolve. Quiet moments, reviewing correspondence late at night, or walking through the offices offered perspective and renewed determination. The presidency tests character as much as intellect and skill. Every decision, interaction, and policy reflects the values and principles a leader embodies. I resolved to ensure that mine consistently demonstrated integrity, diligence, and a commitment to public service. As this section progressed, the results of principled leadership became increasingly evident. Administrative reforms strengthened efficiency and public trust. Economic measures balanced opportunity and fairness. Diplomatic initiatives maintained stability and respect abroad. Yet I remained vigilant, understanding that governance is unceasing work, requiring ethical discernment, sustained focus, and steadfast dedication. By the end of this first section, I reflected on the enduring impact of the presidency. Every choice shapes institutions, affects lives, and sets precedents for future leaders. I remained committed to guiding the office with integrity, ensuring that my tenure reinforced public confidence and exemplified principled leadership for generations to come. As I moved into the final months of my presidency, the weight of office was accompanied by reflection and a deepened sense of purpose. Every decision, whether concerning domestic policy, administrative oversight, or international affairs, carried significance far beyond the moment. Leadership is defined not by temporary acclaim or recognition, but by the consistency, integrity, and lasting impact of one's actions on the nation and its people. Domestic affairs demanded ongoing attention. Economic decisions, infrastructure projects, and legislation affecting farmers, workers, and small businesses required careful consideration. I reviewed data, consulted advisors, and weighed historical precedent, striving to make choices that promoted fairness, stability, and opportunity. Every policy carried tangible consequences for the lives of citizens, and I approached each with diligence, foresight, and moral clarity. Civil service reform remained a central commitment. The entrenched system of patronage had long hindered government efficiency and public confidence. I worked diligently to implement merit-based appointments, enhance oversight, and cultivate integrity across all levels of administration. Though resistance persisted, steady, principled action gradually yielded meaningful results. Strengthening the foundations of government was essential not only to my administration, but to the enduring credibility and stability of the nation. International matters required continuous vigilance. Diplomacy, trade agreements, and national security issues demanded strategic foresight and ethical consistency. Each decision had the potential to influence America's standing in the world and its long-term prosperity. I approached these matters carefully, analyzing counsel, assessing risks, and ensuring that every action was guided by principle and national interest. Leadership requires courage to act rightly even amid uncertainty, and I endeavored to uphold this standard consistently. Public engagement was essential to informed governance. Letters, petitions, and direct appeals provided insight into the real-world effects of policy decisions. Listening attentively ensured that government remained responsive and attuned to the needs of the people. Leadership is ultimately an act of service, and every decision must honor the trust placed in the office while reflecting a commitment to justice, fairness, and the public good. Managing internal dynamics demanded patience and discernment. Cabinet members and advisors often held differing opinions, and reconciling these perspectives was necessary for coherent policy. I encouraged discussion, considered all viewpoints carefully, and ensured that final decisions reflected principle and the public interest rather than personal ambition or partisan objectives. True leadership is revealed in the ability to navigate disagreement with integrity, clarity, and purpose. Public scrutiny was relentless. Every statement, policy, and action was analyzed, debated, and frequently criticized. Yet this attention reinforced the necessity of patience, resilience, and ethical steadfastness. Leadership is not defined by transient approval, but by the consistent application of principle in service of the nation. Past experiences in governance guided me in maintaining focus, balance, and steady judgment amid criticism and pressure. Reflection and contemplation were indispensable. Quiet moments, reviewing correspondence late at night, or walking through the executive offices allowed perspective and renewed determination. The presidency tests character as much as intellect or administrative skill. Every action, interaction, and policy reflects the principles and values a leader embodies. I resolved to ensure that mine consistently demonstrated integrity, diligence, and devotion to public service. As this final section unfolded, the tangible outcomes of principled leadership became evident. Administrative reforms strengthened efficiency and public confidence. Economic measures promoted fairness and opportunity. Diplomatic initiatives maintained stability and respect abroad. Yet I remain mindful that governance is an ongoing practice, demanding unceasing attention, ethical judgment, and unwavering dedication. By the conclusion of Chapter 14, I fully appreciated that the presidency, though temporary, leaves a lasting legacy. Every decision, policy, and action shapes institutions, affects citizens' lives, and sets precedents for future leaders. I remained committed to ensuring that my tenure exemplified principled leadership, reinforced public trust, and left a durable legacy of service, fairness, and ethical governance for the nation. As I entered the concluding phase of my public life, I was struck by the weight of reflection upon the years I had spent serving the nation. Leadership, I realized, is not merely a function of office, authority, or decision-making. It is a continuous commitment to ethical principle, the welfare of citizens, and the enduring integrity of the institutions entrusted to me. Each day brought responsibilities that tested patience, judgment, and moral clarity, and each decision carried consequences for generations yet to come. Domestic governance required unwavering attention. Economic policy, fiscal oversight, and infrastructure development demanded careful thought and consultation. I considered the needs of farmers, laborers, and business owners alike, striving to implement measures that promoted fairness, stability, and opportunity. I reviewed reports, consulted experts, and studied historical precedents, always weighing immediate benefits against long-term consequences. Leadership, I understood, is measured by the lasting impact of principled decisions rather than temporary acclaim or popular approval. Civil service reform remained a guiding principle. The long-standing system of patronage had undermined both efficiency and public trust. I worked to implement merit-based appointments, enforce accountability, and cultivate a culture of integrity throughout the administration. While resistance was natural, persistent, principled effort gradually yielded meaningful improvements. Ensuring that government was competent, transparent, and accountable was essential not only to my administration, but to the broader stability and credibility of the nation. International affairs demanded constant vigilance. Diplomacy, trade agreements, and national security required strategic foresight and ethical consistency. Each decision could influence America's global reputation and prosperity for decades. I approached these challenges with careful deliberation, weighing counsel, analyzing risks, and ensuring that principle guided every course of action. Leadership requires courage to act rightly even in the face of uncertainty or opposition, and I sought to uphold that standard in all matters. Maintaining connection with the public was essential. Letters, petitions, and personal accounts from citizens provided critical insight into the effects of policy decisions. Attentive listening ensured that government remained responsive and empathetic, grounded in the lived experiences of those it served. Leadership, I recognized, is fundamentally an act of service. Every choice must honor the trust placed in the office while reflecting fairness, justice, and dedication to the public good. Managing the internal dynamics of the administration required patience and discernment. Cabinet members and advisors often held differing views, and reconciling these perspectives was necessary for coherent governance. I encouraged debate, carefully weighed arguments, and ensured that final decisions reflected principle and the public interest rather than personal or political agendas. True leadership is revealed in the capacity to navigate disagreement with integrity, clarity, and purpose. Public scrutiny was relentless. Every statement, policy, and action was examined, debated, and frequently criticized. Yet such attention reinforced the necessity of steadfastness, moral clarity, and resilience. Leadership is defined not by fleeting approval, but by consistent, principled action in service to the nation. Drawing upon past experiences, I maintained focus, perspective, and steady judgment amidst criticism and challenge. Reflection and contemplation were indispensable. Quiet moments, whether reviewing correspondence late at night or walking through the offices, provided perspective and renewed determination. The presidency and public service more broadly test character as much as intellect or skill. Every decision, interaction, and policy reflects the principles a leader embodies. I resolved to ensure that mine consistently demonstrated integrity, diligence, and commitment to public service as this section progressed. the tangible results of principled leadership became increasingly apparent. Administrative reforms strengthened efficiency and public confidence. Economic measures promoted fairness and opportunity. Diplomatic initiatives reinforced stability and international respect. Yet I remained vigilant, aware that governance is ongoing work, requiring unceasing attention, ethical judgment, and steadfast dedication. By the end of this first section, I reflected deeply on the enduring responsibility of leadership. Every decision shapes institutions, affects lives, and establishes precedents for future leaders. I remained committed to guiding the office with integrity, ensuring that my service reinforced public trust and exemplified principled leadership for generations to come. As I moved into the final months of my public career, I felt the weight of reflection and the responsibility of legacy pressing upon me. Each decision, whether concerning domestic policy, administrative oversight, or international affairs, carried implications far beyond the immediate moment. Leadership is measured not by applause or transient recognition, but by the enduring impact of principled action on the nation, its institutions, and the people who place their trust in government. Domestic governance required constant vigilance. Economic policies, infrastructure projects, and legislation affecting farmers, workers, and business owners demanded deliberate thought and foresight. I reviewed reports, consulted advisors, and considered historical precedent, striving to make decisions that promoted fairness, stability, and opportunity. Every choice had tangible consequences for citizens, and I approached each with diligence, ethical clarity, and long-term perspective. Civil service reform remained a central priority. The long-standing patronage system had eroded efficiency and public confidence. I worked tirelessly to implement merit-based appointments, strengthen oversight, and cultivate integrity throughout the administration. Resistance persisted, yet consistent, principled effort gradually produced meaningful improvements. Ensuring government competence, accountability, and transparency was essential not only to my administration, but to the long-term credibility and stability of the nation. International affairs demanded equal attention and careful deliberation. Diplomacy, trade negotiations, and national security issues required strategic foresight and ethical consistency. Each action had the potential to shape America's global reputation and prosperity for decades. I approached these matters with meticulous care, weighing counsel, assessing risks, and ensuring that every decision reflected principle and the nation's long-term interests. True leadership requires courage to act rightly even amid uncertainty, and I strive to uphold that standard in all matters. Engaging with the public remained crucial. Letters, petitions, and direct appeals provided insight into the real-world effects of policy. Attentive listening allowed government to remain responsive, empathetic, and connected to the needs of the people. Leadership, I recognized, is fundamentally service. Every decision must honor the trust placed in the office and reflect commitment to justice, fairness, and the public good. Managing internal dynamics required patience, discernment, and integrity. Cabinet members and advisors often held divergent perspectives, and reconciling these viewpoints was essential for coherent governance. I encouraged discussion, considered each argument thoughtfully, and ensured that final decisions reflected principle and public interest rather than personal or political ambition. Leadership is most rigorously tested when navigating disagreement, and the ability to act decisively and ethically defines both the administration and the office itself. Public scrutiny was unrelenting. Every policy, statement, and action was examined, debated, and frequently criticized. Yet such attention reinforced the importance of steadfastness, resilience, and ethical conduct. Leadership is not defined by temporary popularity, but by consistent adherence to principle and commitment to serving the nation. Experience guided me in maintaining focus, balance, and steady judgment amid pressure and criticism. Reflection and contemplation became essential tools to sustain clarity of judgment. Quiet moments, reviewing correspondence late at night, or walking through the halls of the executive offices, offered perspective and renewed determination. The presidency tests character as much as intellect and skill. Every action, decision, and interaction reflects the principles and values a leader embodies. I resolved to ensure mine consistently demonstrated integrity, diligence, and dedication to public service, As this final section progressed, the tangible outcomes of principled leadership became apparent. Administrative reforms improved efficiency and public trust. Economic policies promoted fairness and opportunity. Diplomatic initiatives reinforced stability and respect abroad. Yet I remain mindful that governance is unceasing work, requiring continuous attention, ethical judgment, and unwavering dedication. By the conclusion of Chapter 15, I fully appreciated that the work of leadership, though bounded in time, leaves lasting consequences. Every decision, policy, and action shapes institutions, impacts lives, and establishes precedents for future leaders. I remained committed to ensuring that my tenure exemplified principled leadership, reinforced public confidence, and left a durable legacy of service, fairness, and ethical governance for the nation. As I reflected on the final stages of my public life, I found myself contemplating the broader meaning of my experiences and the enduring lessons leadership had taught me. A lifetime devoted to serving the nation revealed both the fragility and resilience of human institutions, the weight of moral responsibility, and the importance of humility and steadfastness in the face of complexity. Every decision, no matter how small, had the potential to influence the course of the country, affect countless citizens, and set precedents for those who would come after me. Domestic governance demanded continuous attention. Economic policies required careful balancing of interests. Farmers, laborers, and business owners all needed thoughtful consideration. Each legislative measure, tariff adjustment, or federal budget allocation required meticulous analysis and principled judgment. I reviewed countless reports, consulted advisors, and drew upon historical examples, always aware that leadership is measured not by immediate results, but by the enduring impact of fair and principled decisions. The challenge lay not only in policy formulation, but in ensuring implementation adhered to the same standards of integrity and effectiveness. Administrative reform occupied a central portion of my work. Long-standing patronage had undermined efficiency and public trust. I committed myself to advancing merit-based appointments, establishing clear accountability, and fostering a culture of integrity throughout every branch of government. This work required persistence, patience, and a willingness to confront resistance. Yet each incremental improvement strengthened the foundations of governance, demonstrating that principled action, though sometimes slow to bear fruit, ultimately yields lasting results. I believe that the credibility of government depends upon its ability to function effectively, transparently, and ethically. International affairs demanded equal attention and constant vigilance. Diplomacy, trade negotiations, and matters of national security required careful deliberation and foresight. Each action could shape America's reputation abroad and influence the prosperity of future generations. I approached these responsibilities with both prudence and courage, always mindful that the principles guiding action must be consistent and unwavering, even amid complex challenges or unexpected opposition. Leadership is tested most when the right path is neither simple nor immediately rewarded, and I sought to uphold that standard in every decision. Engaging with the public remained a cornerstone of effective governance. Letters, petitions, and personal appeals provided vital insight into the real-life consequences of policy decisions. By listening attentively, I ensured that the government remained responsive, empathetic, and connected to the lives of ordinary citizens. Leadership is fundamentally an act of service, and every choice must honor the trust the people place in those entrusted with power. Managing the internal dynamics of the administration required constant diligence. Cabinet members, advisors, and colleagues often held divergent viewpoints, and reconciling these differences was essential for coherent governance. I encouraged discussion, weighed arguments carefully, and made certain that final decisions reflected principle and public interest rather than personal or political gain. True leadership is revealed not in moments of agreement, but in the ability to navigate discord with integrity, clarity, and ethical courage. Public scrutiny was relentless, often intense, and sometimes unforgiving. Every policy, statement, and action was analyzed, debated, and criticized. Yet such scrutiny reinforced the importance of resilience, steadfastness, and moral clarity. Leadership is not defined by temporary approval, but by consistent adherence to principle, the courage to act rightly, and commitment to the welfare of the nation. Experience taught me to maintain perspective, distinguishing transient disapproval from the enduring value of principled action. Reflection and quiet contemplation were essential for maintaining clarity of purpose. Late nights spent reviewing correspondence, walks through the corridors of the executive offices, and moments of solitary thought provided perspective, self-assessment, and renewed determination. The presidency and public service more broadly test character as much as skill or intellect. Every decision, interaction, and policy embodies the values of the individual and leadership, and I resolved to ensure that my own actions consistently reflected integrity, diligence, and dedication to the public good. Over time, the results of principled leadership became apparent. Administrative reforms strengthened efficiency and public confidence. Economic policies promoted fairness, stability, and opportunity. Diplomatic initiatives maintained respect and security abroad. Yet I remained vigilant, aware that governance is unceasing work, requiring constant attention, ethical judgment, and unshakable dedication. In reflecting on my entire public career, I recognized the profound responsibility entrusted to those in leadership. Each decision shapes institutions, affects lives, and establishes precedents for future generations. The office may be temporary, but its impact endures. I strove to ensure that my actions exemplified integrity, reinforced public trust, and left a lasting legacy of principled leadership. Above all, I came to understand that true service is measured not by recognition, but by the enduring benefit to the nation and the people it serves. As this stage of my life drew to a close, I felt both humility and fulfillment. The challenges, the triumphs, and even the setbacks had contributed to a deeper understanding of leadership, duty, and the moral responsibilities inherent in public service. The lessons I had learned, the principles I upheld, and the decisions I made would echo long after I left office, shaping the conduct, values, and aspirations of those who followed. Leadership, I realized, exerts an eternal influence, even when the individual who holds the office eventually steps aside. As I look back upon the life I have lived, I am struck not by the honors or titles I have held, but by the opportunities one have had to serve the people, to uphold principles, and to strive for a better nation. The challenges were many, the burdens often heavy, yet each experience, each triumph and setback shaped the person I became and the lessons I carry. Leadership is not measured by fleeting applause or public recognition, but by the enduring impact of decisions made with integrity, courage, and dedication. I hope that through my work, I have contributed, even in a small way, to the strength of the institutions that guide our nation and the trust of the people who call it home. Life in public service has taught me the value of perseverance, honesty, and empathy. It has shown me that true progress is built on thoughtful action, principled choices, and the unwavering commitment to serve others above oneself. As I conclude this reflection, I am filled with gratitude for my family, my colleagues, and the citizens who entrusted me with responsibility. I am humbled by the weight of that trust, and I remain ever mindful of the enduring duties that leadership demands. May those who come after me continue to uphold the values of integrity, fairness, and service, and may the nation flourish through the commitment of all who devote themselves to the common good. My life has been one of service, challenge, and purpose, and I am content knowing that I have sought, in all that I did, to honor the trust placed in me and to leave the nation stronger and better for future generations.